I was scrolling through a support group forum for stroke survivors, reading stories of recovery and resilience, when I came across a post that made my hands tremble so violently, I nearly dropped my tablet. A woman named Patricia was describing how she'd returned home from 6 months of rehabilitation after a massive stroke to find her apartment completely empty. Her family had donated all her belongings to charity, assuming she'd never be capable of independent living again. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The comments section was explosive with outrage. How could they give up on you like that? Your own family should have been your biggest supporters. This is elder abuse. They had no right to make those decisions without your consent. Sue them for everything they're worth. What kind of monsters abandon someone when they're most vulnerable? What made my blood run cold wasn't just the heartbreaking cruelty of Patricia's story. It was that I was reading it while sitting in my supposedly empty living room in Millbrook Heights, staring at the bare walls where my grandmother's antique clock used to hang, surrounded by nothing but a folding chair and a card table that the rehab center had provided for my transition back to simplified living. Just 3 days ago, I had returned from Riverside Recovery Institute after 8 grueling months of speech, physical, and occupational therapy following my stroke, expecting to continue my healing journey in the comfort of my own home. Instead, I'd walked into what looked like a crime scene. Every piece of furniture gone, every photograph missing, every book from my extensive library vanished. Even my clothes replaced with a handful of basic items in sizes that didn't fit properly. But here's what my daughter Cassandra and son-in-law Brandon didn't know when they decided to simplify my life by donating away my entire existence. I wasn't just some helpless stroke victim they could manage and control. I was a retired forensic accountant who had spent 35 years tracking down financial fraud and asset manipulation for the FBI. And right now, sitting in this empty shell of my former home, I was about to use every skill I'd ever learned to uncover exactly what they'd done with my life, and make them pay for every single item they'd stolen from me. Let me tell you how I went from being written off as a lost cause to becoming the woman who would expose a scheme so calculated and cruel that it would land my own daughter in federal prison. It all started 11 months ago when I was 68 years old, living independently in my beautiful Victorian home in Millbrook Heights, just outside of Burlington. I had been widowed for 7 years since my husband Theodore passed, but I had built a rich, fulfilling life for myself. My days were filled with volunteer work at the Millbrook Community Center, weekly bridge games with my close-knit group of friends, and managing my late husband's substantial investment portfolio that had grown considerably under my careful stewardship. I was particularly proud of my home, a stunning 1890s Victorian that Theodore and I had lovingly restored over 25 years of marriage. Every room told a story. The hand-carved walnut dining set that had belonged to my great-grandmother, the collection of first-edition mystery novels I'd been building since college, the antique Persian rugs we'd found in a tiny shop in Istanbul during our anniversary trip, and, most precious of all, my late mother's jewelry collection, and the family photographs spanning 4 generations that lined the hallway leading to my study. My relationship with my daughter Cassandra had always been complicated. She was 45, worked as a real estate agent in the affluent Riverside district, and had married Brandon Hutchinson, a personal injury lawyer who specialized in what he called maximizing settlement opportunities. They lived in a sprawling modern mansion in Elmwood Estates, drove matching BMW SUVs, and sent their twin boys, Jeremy and Nathan, to Millbrook Prep Academy, all lifestyle choices that required significant financial resources. Cassandra had always been somewhat resentful of my financial independence. She frequently made comments about how lucky I was to have Theodore's life insurance and pension, as if my comfortable retirement was an accident rather than the result of 40 years of careful saving and wise investment decisions. She often hinted that my house was too big for one person, and suggested I might be happier in a senior living community where I wouldn't have to worry about maintenance and upkeep. But I loved my independence. At 68, I was sharp, active, and fully capable of managing my own affairs. I had a trusted housekeeper, Emma Rodriguez, who came twice a week to help with heavy cleaning, and a reliable handyman, David Chen, who handled any repairs or maintenance issues. My financial advisor, Patricia at Millbrook Wealth Management, helped me review my portfolio quarterly, but I made all the major decisions myself. I had worked too hard for too long to give up my autonomy to anyone, even family. The stroke happened on a Tuesday morning in March while I was watering my prized orchid collection in the sunroom. One moment I was misting the delicate petals of my prize-winning phalaenopsis, and the next moment I was on the floor, unable to speak or move the entire right side of my body. Thank God for Emma, who found me an hour later when she arrived for her regular cleaning day. She immediately called 911, and within minutes paramedics were rushing me to Millbrook General Hospital. The next several weeks were a blur of medical procedures, consultations with neurologists, and the beginning of what would become the most challenging period of my life. The stroke had been severe, what the doctors called a major left hemispheric infarction, affecting my speech, my mobility, and initially, my cognitive processing. For the first month, I couldn't speak coherently, could barely move my right arm and leg, and struggled with simple tasks like remembering faces or following basic instructions. Cassandra and Brandon were at the hospital constantly during those first weeks, and I was touched by what seemed like genuine concern and devotion. Cassandra held my hand during the frightening early days when I couldn't communicate, and Brandon handled all the insurance paperwork and coordinated with my doctors. They assured me repeatedly that I shouldn't worry about anything at home. They would take care of everything while I focused on recovery. "Mom, just concentrate on getting better," Cassandra would say, squeezing my hand. "Brandon and I will handle all the practical stuff. You don't need to worry about bills or the house or any of that. We've got it covered." At the time, I was grateful for their support. The stroke had left me feeling vulnerable and dependent in ways I'd never experienced, and knowing that my family was managing my affairs allowed me to pour all my energy into the exhausting work of rehabilitation. After 6 weeks at Millbrook General, I was transferred to Riverside Recovery Institute, a specialized facility about an hour away that focused on intensive stroke rehabilitation. The doctors told me I would likely be there for several months, working with speech therapists, physical therapists, and occupational therapists to regain as much function as possible. Mrs. Whitmore, Dr. Jennifer Santos, my neurologist, explained during one of our early consultations, stroke recovery is often a marathon, not a sprint. Some patients see dramatic improvements in the first few months, while others continue making gains for years. The key is patience, persistence, and not giving up hope. I threw myself into rehabilitation with the same determination I'd once brought to complex financial investigations. Every day was structured around therapy sessions: speech therapy to rebuild my ability to communicate clearly, physical therapy to strengthen my weakened right side, and occupational therapy to relearn basic life skills like cooking, dressing, and managing personal care. It was humbling and often frustrating work. Simple tasks that I'd performed without thinking for decades, writing a check, buttoning a shirt, even holding a coffee cup steady, required intense concentration and practice. There were days when I felt like giving up, when the progress seemed impossibly slow and the path back to independence seemed insurmountable. But I had something that many stroke patients struggle to maintain: a fierce determination to reclaim my life exactly as it had been before. I wasn't ready to accept a diminished existence, or to become dependent on others for my basic needs. Every small victory, the first time I could write my own name legibly, the day I walked the length of the hallway without assistance, the moment when I could speak a complete sentence without struggling for words, felt like a triumph worth celebrating. Throughout my months at Riverside, Cassandra and Brandon visited regularly, bringing flowers and updates about life back in Millbrook Heights. They told me about neighbors who asked about my recovery, about Emma continuing to check on the house, and about how they were managing my bills and correspondence. Everything seemed to be under control, and I felt grateful to have family who cared enough to handle these responsibilities while I focused on healing. What I didn't know was that my gratitude was exactly what they had been counting on. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Before I explain how my own daughter systematically dismantled my entire life while I lay helpless in a hospital bed, I need you to understand the relationship we had built over the years, and more importantly, the financial foundation that made me such an attractive target. My life in Millbrook Heights had been carefully constructed over decades of smart decisions and genuine relationships. After Theodore's death 7 years earlier, I had transformed what could have been a lonely widowhood into a rich, purposeful existence. My Victorian home at 1247 Maple Grove Lane wasn't just a house. It was a testament to a life well lived, filled with treasures that represented decades of love, travel, and careful collecting. The house itself was worth approximately $1.2 million, but its true value lay in the contents. Theodore and I had been what you might call thoughtful collectors. We didn't accumulate random objects. Every piece in our home had a story, a purpose, and often significant monetary value. My jewelry collection alone, which included my mother's 1940s Art Deco pieces and several items Theodore had given me for anniversaries, was valued at over $85,000 by my insurance company. But perhaps most valuable was my book collection. As a forensic accountant, I had always been an avid reader of mysteries and crime novels, and over the years I had acquired an impressive collection of first editions, including signed copies from authors like Agatha Christie, Raymond Chandler, and Dorothy Sayers. The collection, housed in custom-built walnut bookcases in my study, was worth nearly $200,000, according to the last professional appraisal. My financial situation was equally solid. Theodore's pension provided a comfortable monthly income, his life insurance had been substantial, and my own retirement savings from 35 years with the FBI were considerable. More importantly, I had continued to actively manage our investment portfolio after his death, growing it from $800,000 to nearly $1.4 million through careful research and strategic decisions. I wasn't just financially secure. I was wealthy by most standards, though I lived modestly and preferred to spend money on experiences, books, and charitable giving rather than flashy displays of wealth. Cassandra had always been aware of my financial situation, though I had never shared specific details about the full extent of my assets. What she did know was that I owned my home outright, had investments, and lived comfortably without any apparent financial stress. She also knew that, as my only child, she would eventually inherit everything. But Cassandra had never been particularly patient about inheritance. Over the years, she had made increasingly frequent comments about my rattling around in that big house and suggestions that I might be happier somewhere with more support. These conversations always followed the same pattern. She would visit, walk through the rooms with what seemed like appraising eyes, and then launch into concerns about my isolation and the burden of maintaining such a large property. "Mom," she would say, running her fingers along my grandmother's mahogany dining table, "this house is just so much work for one person. And honestly, some of these antiques are just collecting dust. Wouldn't you rather have the money in investments where it could be working for you?" I always deflected these suggestions with humor. "Darling, I'm not ready to live in a beige box surrounded by other people's schedules. I like my things exactly where they are." But I should have paid more attention to how often these conversations happened and how detailed her questions about specific items had become. When the stroke happened and I was rushed to Millbrook General Hospital, Cassandra immediately stepped into what she called, quote, crisis management mode. Within hours of my arrival at the emergency room, she had contacted my bank, my insurance company, and my financial advisor to inform them of my condition and establish herself as my point of contact for all matters related to my care and finances. Mrs. Whitmore is incapacitated, I later learned she had told Patricia Wells, my financial advisor. The doctors aren't sure about her cognitive recovery, so for now, all communication about her accounts should go through me. I have her power of attorney. This was the first lie, but Patricia had no reason to question it. In the chaos of a medical emergency, it seemed reasonable that my daughter would be handling my affairs temporarily. Within a week of my stroke, Cassandra had arranged for what she called protective measures for my home and assets. She hired a security company to monitor the house, had my mail forwarded to her address temporarily, and arranged for a storage company to pack up what she termed valuable items to prevent theft while the house sat empty during my rehabilitation. "Mom, you don't need to worry about any of this," she assured me during one of her daily visits to the hospital. "Brandon and I are making sure everything is properly secured. You just focus on getting better." At the time, I was touched by her efficiency and apparent concern. The stroke had left me feeling overwhelmed by the simplest decisions, and knowing that someone I trusted was handling the practical matters allowed me to concentrate entirely on the exhausting work of recovery. Brandon, meanwhile, positioned himself as my legal advocate. As a personal injury attorney, he was familiar with insurance processes and medical systems, and he took charge of communicating with my doctors, reviewing treatment options, and ensuring that my insurance claims were processed properly. "Eleanor," he would say, sitting beside my hospital bed with legal pads covered in notes, "I want you to know that Cassandra and I are treating your care like it's our full-time job. You've taken such good care of everyone else your whole life. Now it's time to let us take care of you." I was genuinely moved by their dedication. They visited every day, brought books and magazines, and seemed genuinely invested in my recovery. When I struggled with speech therapy, Cassandra would patiently help me practice pronunciation. When physical therapy left me exhausted and discouraged, Brandon would remind me of my accomplishments and strength. "You're the toughest person I know," he would tell me. "If anyone can beat this thing, it's you, and we're going to be right here supporting you every step of the way." Their support seemed so genuine that when they suggested I might benefit from an extended stay at a specialized rehabilitation facility, I trusted their research and recommendations completely. "Mom, Riverside Recovery Institute has the best stroke rehabilitation program in the state," Cassandra explained, showing me brochures with smiling patients and modern therapy equipment. "It's expensive, but that's what your savings are for, right? You've always said you wanted the best medical care available." The cost was indeed substantial, nearly $8,000 per week for the intensive program they recommended. But I had worked my entire life to ensure I could afford the best care if I ever needed it, and this certainly qualified as that moment. "If you think it's the right choice, then that's what we'll do," I told them. "I want to recover as completely as possible." "We'll handle all the arrangements," Brandon assured me. "The transportation, the insurance coordination, everything. You don't need to worry about a single detail." Looking back now, I realized this was the moment when they stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a problem to be managed and a resource to be controlled. As my departure date for Riverside approached, Cassandra became increasingly focused on what she called practical preparations for my extended absence. "Mom, the house is going to be empty for months," she said during one of our last conversations at Millbrook General. "I think we should move your most valuable things into secure storage, just to be safe. You know how break-ins can happen when houses look unoccupied." This seemed reasonable, even prudent. I had expensive jewelry, valuable art, and my precious book collection that would indeed be attractive targets for thieves. "That's very thoughtful, dear. What did you have in mind?" "Well, Brandon found a climate-controlled storage facility that specializes in valuable items. They have insurance, security systems, the works. We could move your jewelry, the first-edition books, maybe some of the antique furniture. Just the really valuable pieces that would be hard to replace." "That sounds like a sensible precaution. I appreciate you thinking of these details." "And Mom," I was thinking, "while you're focused on recovery, maybe this would be a good time to simplify things a bit. I mean, when you come home, you're going to need to focus on rebuilding your strength, not managing a house full of things that require maintenance and care. I should have asked more questions about what simplify meant. I should have insisted on detailed inventories and receipts. I should have remembered my own professional training about the importance of documentation and oversight when large sums of money and valuable assets are involved. But I was tired, scared, and grateful to have family members who seemed willing to handle complicated logistics while I fought to regain my basic functions. Whatever you think is best, sweetheart, I trust your judgment. Those words, I trust your judgment, would turn out to be the most expensive mistake of my life. The day before I was transferred to Riverside, Cassandra and Brandon spent hours at my house with what they said was a, quote, professional inventory team, cataloging valuable items for storage. They assured me they were being extremely careful and thorough, creating detailed lists of everything being removed for safekeeping. We're treating this like the valuable collection it is, Brandon told me that evening. Every item photographed, documented, and properly packed by professionals. When you're ready to come home, everything will be returned exactly as it was. I signed the papers they put in front of me, storage agreements, insurance forms, and what I believed were temporary custody documents for my valuables. I was focused on the next day's transfer to rehabilitation and trusted that my family had my best interests at heart. As they wheeled me out of Millbrook General toward the ambulance that would take me to Riverside Recovery Institute, I felt optimistic about the future. Yes, the stroke had been devastating, but I had excellent medical care, a comprehensive rehabilitation plan, and family members who were handling all the practical details of my life with apparent love and competence. I had no idea I was being driven away from my old life forever, or that the people I trusted most in the world had just executed the opening moves in a scheme to steal everything I had spent 70 years building. But I was about to find out exactly what trust your judgment had cost me. The first month at Riverside Recovery Institute was exactly what I had hoped for. Intensive, challenging, but filled with measurable progress. My speech therapist, Dr. Rachel Martinez, worked with me daily on rebuilding my vocabulary and sentence structure. My physical therapist, Kevin Thompson, pushed me through increasingly difficult exercises to strengthen my right side. Most importantly, my occupational therapist, Linda Park, helped me relearn the fine motor skills I would need to eventually return to independent living. For those first 4 weeks, everything seemed to be proceeding according to plan. Cassandra called every other day with updates about life back home, and her reports were consistently reassuring. The house was secure, the storage company had successfully moved my valuables to climate-controlled facilities, and all my bills were being paid on time through the automatic systems Brandon had established. "Mom, you don't need to worry about anything on the home front," she would tell me during our regular phone calls. "Emma is still checking on the house twice a week. She says it looks perfect. The garden service is keeping up with the landscaping, and Brandon's been monitoring all your financial accounts to make sure everything stays current." I was particularly grateful that they had maintained Emma Rodriguez's housekeeping services. Emma had worked for me for over 6 years and knew my home better than anyone. Having her continue to check on things gave me peace of mind that any potential problems would be caught quickly. But sometime around my 5th week at Riverside, I began noticing subtle changes in our conversations that left me feeling vaguely unsettled. The first red flag was so small I almost dismissed it entirely. During one of our calls, I mentioned that I was hoping to have some of my favorite books sent to the facility, particularly my collection of vintage mystery novels that I found comforting and familiar during the more difficult days of rehabilitation. "Oh, Mom," Cassandra said with what sounded like genuine regret, "I'm so sorry, but those books are all in storage right now. Remember? We packed up all the valuable items for safekeeping. It would be pretty complicated to retrieve specific books from the climate-controlled facility." This seemed reasonable on the surface, but something about her tone bothered me. The books weren't just valuable collectibles. They were also reading material that I had specifically mentioned wanting during my recovery. Why would my daughter prioritize storage security over my emotional comfort during rehabilitation? Well, could you just grab a few favorites when you get a chance? I asked. Maybe the Agatha Christie collection? Those are in the glass case in my study. Oh, you know what? I think those might have been some of the first things we secured because they're so valuable. Let me check with the storage company about their retrieval policy. It might be easier to just buy you some new copies for now. Buy new copies of books I already owned? Books that weren't just reading material but treasured possessions with sentimental value? I found myself agreeing to the suggestion, but a small voice in my head wondered why accessing my own belongings had suddenly become so complicated. The second warning sign came 2 weeks later when I called Emma Rodriguez directly. I had been thinking about my orchid collection, my prize-winning plants that had taken years to cultivate, and wanted to make sure they were receiving proper care during my absence. Emma's response was strange. "Mrs. Eleanor," she said, her voice sounding unusually formal and distant, "I'm not supposed to talk to you about the house. Miss Cassandra told me all communication should go through her while you're recovering." This stopped me cold. Emma and I had always had a warm, friendly relationship. She called me Eleanor, shared stories about her grandchildren, and often stayed for coffee after finishing her cleaning. Now she was calling me Mrs. Eleanor and acting like I was a stranger trying to get unauthorized information about my own home. "Emma, it's me. I just wanted to check on my orchids in the sunroom. Are they doing okay?" There was a long pause before she responded. "Miss Cassandra said I shouldn't upset you with household details while you're focusing on getting better. Maybe you should call her?" After she hung up, I sat in my rehabilitation room feeling deeply unsettled. Why would my daughter instruct my housekeeper not to speak with me? And why was Emma, who had always been comfortable and chatty, suddenly acting like she was following a script? When I called Cassandra to ask about this conversation, her explanation was smooth and immediate. Too smooth, I would later realize. "Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry about that confusion. Emma was worried about saying the wrong thing and accidentally upsetting you. You know how she is. English isn't her first language, and she was afraid she might give you incorrect information about something and cause you to worry unnecessarily. I told her it would be better if household questions went through me so I could give you accurate updates." This explanation made sense on the surface, but it felt wrong. Emma's English was excellent, and she had never been hesitant to communicate with me before. More troubling was the implication that I couldn't be trusted with accurate updates about my own home. "Well, what about my orchids?" She seemed reluctant to even discuss them. "Your orchids are fine, Mom. I've been checking on them personally. Actually, I moved them to my house temporarily so I could give them more consistent care. You know how particular they are about watering schedules." My orchids were indeed particular about care, which was exactly why I was surprised Cassandra had moved them. She had never shown any interest in gardening, and had actually killed several houseplants I'd given her over the years. Why would she suddenly take on the responsibility of caring for my most demanding plants? That's very thoughtful, but they're really adapted to the specific light conditions in my sunroom. Maybe it would be better to leave them where they are and just have Emma follow the care instructions I wrote out? "Mom, they're really doing great at my place. The lighting in my breakfast nook is actually quite similar to your sunroom. Let's just leave them where they are for now. One less thing for you to worry about." Again, I found myself agreeing, but the conversation left me feeling like I was being managed rather than consulted about my own possessions. The third warning sign was perhaps the most disturbing because it involved my financial advisor, Patricia Wells. During my 7th week at Riverside, I decided to call Patricia directly to check on my investment portfolio and ensure that the substantial payments to the rehabilitation facility weren't creating any cash flow problems. When I called Millbrook Wealth Management and asked to speak with Patricia, her assistant put me on hold for an unusually long time before Patricia came on the line. "Eleanor, how are you feeling? Cassandra has been keeping me updated on your progress." "I'm doing well, thank you. I wanted to check in about my accounts and make sure the facility payments aren't creating any problems with my cash flow." "Oh, you don't need to worry about any of that," Patricia said in a tone that seemed oddly bright and dismissive. "Cassandra has been handling all the account management beautifully. Everything is running very smoothly." This was not the kind of detailed financial discussion I was accustomed to having with Patricia. Normally, she would walk me through specific account balances, recent transactions, and market performance. Now she seemed to be deflecting my questions about my own money. "I'd like to review the recent statements if possible. Could you email them to me here at the facility?" "Well, all your statements are going to Cassandra right now since she's managing your affairs during your recovery. I'm sure she can forward them to you, or we can discuss everything in detail when you're back home and feeling stronger." "Patricia, I'm feeling quite strong mentally. My cognitive function has recovered significantly, and I'm perfectly capable of reviewing my own financial information." There was a pause that lasted just a bit too long before Patricia responded. "Of course, Eleanor. It's just that Cassandra mentioned you might find financial details stressful during your recovery, and we want to support your healing process. But if you'd like to review anything specific, I'm happy to go over it with both of you on a conference call." Both of us? Why did my daughter need to be included in discussions about my own money? And when had I supposedly expressed that financial information would be stressful? I had built a career around analyzing complex financial data. Numbers had never been a source of stress for me. "I think there may be some miscommunication here, Patricia. I never said financial details would be stressful. In fact, knowing that my affairs are being handled properly would reduce my stress." Of course. Let me coordinate with Cassandra to set up a time when we can all review everything together. Would that work for you?" I agreed, but after hanging up, I felt deeply troubled. Why was everyone suddenly treating me like I was mentally incompetent? My speech had improved dramatically, my cognitive function was sharp, and my doctors had repeatedly commented on my excellent progress. Yet somehow both my housekeeper and my financial advisor had been instructed to treat me like I couldn't handle basic information about my own life. That evening, I called Dr. Santos, my neurologist, to get a professional assessment of my mental capacity. "Mrs. Whitmore, your cognitive recovery has been remarkable," she assured me. "Your memory, judgment, and decision-making abilities are all functioning at normal levels. You should absolutely be capable of managing your own affairs and making informed decisions about your care and finances." Armed with this confirmation, I decided to call Cassandra and address my concerns directly. "Sweetheart, I've noticed that people seem to have been told I'm not capable of handling information about my own home and finances. I want to make sure there's no confusion about my mental state." "Oh, Mom, of course not. Everyone knows you're sharp as ever. I think maybe Emma and Patricia are just being extra protective because they care about you. You know how people can be overly cautious when someone's been through a medical crisis?" Her explanation was reasonable, but something in her tone felt rehearsed. And there was something else. During our conversation, I heard what sounded like papers shuffling in the background, as if she were reading from notes while talking to me. "Well, I'd like to schedule a time to review my financial accounts with Patricia this week. And I'd also like to talk to Emma directly about the house. I'm feeling much stronger, and I want to be more involved in managing my affairs." "Absolutely, Mom. That's wonderful that you're feeling ready for that. Let me coordinate with everyone and set up some calls for you." But somehow, those calls never seemed to happen. Patricia was always in meetings when I called. Emma was apparently only working at my house on days when I was in therapy. And Cassandra always had perfectly reasonable explanations for why each conversation needed to be postponed just a little longer. By my 9th week at Riverside, I was starting to feel like I was being systematically isolated from my own life. The rehabilitation was going wonderfully. I was walking without assistance, my speech was clear and strong, and my doctors were talking about discharge planning. But every attempt I made to reconnect with my home, my possessions, or my finances was met with delays, deflections, and explanations that sounded increasingly hollow. The breaking point came during a call with Cassandra, in which I mentioned that I was excited to see my house again and sleep in my own bed. "Oh, Mom," she said, and for the first time I heard something in her voice that sounded almost like panic. "We should probably talk about that. The doctors think you might benefit from a more gradual transition back to independent living. There are some really nice assisted living facilities that specialize in post-stroke care, places where you could have your own apartment but with support services available." Assisted living? I was walking, talking, thinking clearly, and managing my own daily care with minimal assistance. Why was my daughter suddenly suggesting that I needed supervised living? "Cassandra, I don't think you understand how well my recovery is going. I'm planning to return home and resume my normal life, just with some adjustments for my physical limitations. I know you feel ready, Mom, but maybe we should have a family meeting with your doctors to discuss the best options for your long-term care and safety." The way she said long-term care made my blood run cold. This wasn't a conversation about temporary support during recovery. This was a conversation about permanently changing my living situation. That night, lying in my rehabilitation center bed, I realized that something was very wrong with the picture my daughter had been painting for me. And for the first time since my stroke, I began to wonder if the people I trusted most in the world were not taking care of me, but taking care of themselves at my expense. It was time to start asking harder questions and demanding real answers. My forensic accountant instincts, which had been dormant during the vulnerable early days of my recovery, were finally starting to wake up. By my 10th week at Riverside Recovery Institute, I had made a decision that would change everything. I was going to conduct my own investigation into what was happening with my life back in Millbrook Heights. 35 years of forensic accounting hadn't just disappeared because of a stroke, and the inconsistencies in Cassandra's stories were setting off every professional alarm bell I had. The first step was gathering intelligence, and I started with what should have been the simplest task: getting current photographs of my own house. If Cassandra was telling the truth about everything being properly maintained and secured, she should have no problem providing recent photos to ease my mind about the property's condition. "Sweetheart," I said during our next phone call, "I've been having some anxiety about the house sitting empty for so long. You know how much that place means to me. Could you possibly take some photos next time you're there, just so I can see that everything looks okay?" The pause before her response lasted just a fraction too long. "Of course, Mom, that's a great idea. I'll try to get over there this weekend and take some pictures for you." "That would be wonderful. Maybe you could get shots of each room? I'd particularly love to see how my orchids are doing in your breakfast nook, and maybe a photo of the garden to see how the landscaping service is managing everything." "Absolutely. I'll make sure to get comprehensive photos for you." But the weekend came and went without any photos. When I called to follow up, Cassandra had a ready explanation. "Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry. I went by the house on Saturday, but my phone battery died while I was there, and then I got busy with the boys' soccer games on Sunday. Let me try again this week." Another week passed. This time the excuse was that it had been raining and the lighting was too poor for good photographs. The week after that, she had taken photos, but her phone had malfunctioned and lost them all. By the 4th week of photo requests, I was certain she was stalling, but I couldn't understand why. Meanwhile, I had started making my own inquiries through the one resource Cassandra couldn't control: the staff at Riverside Recovery Institute. My case manager, Jennifer Walsh, had worked with many stroke patients over the years and was familiar with the practical challenges of managing property and finances during extended rehabilitation stays. "Mrs. Whitmore," Jennifer said during one of our regular check-in meetings, "it's completely normal to feel anxious about your home during a long rehabilitation stay. Have you considered asking a neighbor or friend to do an independent check on the property? Sometimes family members get overwhelmed managing everything, and having another set of eyes can be reassuring." This was an excellent suggestion. My next-door neighbor, Robert Harrison, was a retired police officer who had lived on Maple Grove Lane for over 20 years. He and his wife Dorothy had been good friends for years, and Robert was exactly the kind of person who would notice if anything seemed amiss with my property. I called Robert that afternoon, and his warm, familiar voice immediately put me at ease. "Eleanor, Dorothy and I have been wondering how you're doing. We heard about your stroke from Cassandra, and we've been keeping you in our prayers. Thank you, Robert. I'm doing much better than expected. Actually, I was wondering if I could ask you a favor. I've been feeling a bit anxious about the house sitting empty for so long. Have you noticed anything that seems concerning? Any signs of problems with maintenance or security? Robert's response was not what I expected. Well, Eleanor, I have to say we've been a little confused about the situation over there. There's been a lot of activity at your house. Trucks, moving vans, people coming and going. Cassandra told us you were having some renovations done while you were away, but it seems like an awful lot of work for someone who's planning to come home soon. My blood went cold. Renovations? What kind of renovations? Well, there have been several large moving trucks over the past few weeks. Professional moving crews, it looked like. Dorothy and I assumed you were having the house staged for some major work, but honestly it looked more like people were moving things out rather than bringing new materials in. Moving things out. Large trucks, professional crews. This was not the secure storage of valuables that Cassandra had described. Robert, when was the last time you saw this activity? Just yesterday, actually. There was a big truck there, most of the afternoon. The crew was very professional, had uniforms and everything, but they were definitely removing items from the house, not bringing things in. Did you happen to see what they were taking? Well, we didn't want to be nosy, but from our kitchen window, Dorothy saw them loading what looked like furniture. A dining room set, maybe? Some large pieces that took several men to carry. My grandmother's mahogany dining set. The table and chairs that had been in my family for 3 generations. Why would that need to be moved to secure storage when it had been safely in my dining room for decades? Robert, I need to ask you something important, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Based on what you've observed, does it look like someone is moving things out of my house permanently, or does it look like temporary storage for renovation? Robert was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried the careful tone of someone who was trying to deliver bad news gently. Eleanor, if I had to guess based on what we've seen, I'd say someone is cleaning out that house. The volume of items being removed, the type of trucks, the way the crews have been working, it looks like a complete house clearance, not selective storage of valuables. After I hung up with Robert, I sat in my rehabilitation room trying to process what I had learned. Cassandra hadn't been securing my valuables. She had been systematically emptying my house. But why? And what was she planning to tell me when I was ready to return home? I needed more information, and I needed it from a source that Cassandra couldn't influence or control. That evening, I called the Millbrook Heights Police Department and asked to speak with someone about doing a wellness check on my property. Officer Maria Santos, who took my call, was professional and thorough in gathering information about my situation. Mrs. Whitmore, you have every right to request a check on your own property, especially given your circumstances. Can you tell me what specific concerns you have? I explained about the conflicting information I was receiving and my neighbor's observations about unusual activity at the house. I'd like an officer to do a visual inspection of the property and provide me with an independent assessment of its current condition. I'm particularly concerned about whether the house appears to be occupied, properly maintained, and secure. That's a reasonable request. I can have an officer do a drive-by today and a more thorough exterior inspection tomorrow. Would you like us to call you directly with our findings? Yes, please. And Officer Santos, I'd prefer that my family not be notified about this check unless there's an emergency situation that requires their involvement. The next afternoon, Officer Santos called me back with a report that confirmed my worst fears. Mrs. Whitmore, I personally inspected your property this morning. The house appears to be completely vacant. I could see through several windows, and there's no furniture visible in any of the rooms. The garage is empty, and there are no personal items or signs of occupancy anywhere on the property. Empty. Completely empty. Not selectively cleared for renovations, not temporarily storing valuables. Completely emptied as if no one had ever lived there. Officer Santos, my daughter told me she was having my valuable items moved to secure storage while I'm in rehabilitation. Does what you observed look consistent with that explanation? Ma'am, I've seen a lot of houses that have been cleared for various reasons. What I observed at your property looks like a complete house clearance, either for sale, for abandonment, or for some other permanent change in occupancy. It doesn't look like selective storage of valuables. Is there anything you can do to help me understand what's happened to my belongings? Mrs. Whitmore, this appears to be a family matter rather than a criminal issue, but I'd strongly recommend that you contact an attorney who specializes in elder law or estate planning. If your belongings have been disposed of without your consent, that could potentially be theft, regardless of who did it. An attorney. The suggestion that I might need legal representation to recover my own possessions from my own daughter was devastating, but I was beginning to understand that this might be exactly what was necessary. That evening, I used the computer in Riverside's Family Resource Center to research elder law attorneys in the Burlington area. I needed someone with experience in financial exploitation cases, someone who would take my concerns seriously, even though the alleged perpetrator was my own daughter. The law firm of Harrison Keller and Associates specialized in elder abuse cases, and their website included several testimonials from clients who had recovered assets that had been improperly taken by family members. I called their office first thing the next morning. Attorney Diana Keller was direct and knowledgeable when I explained my situation during our initial consultation. Mrs. Whitmore, what you're describing could constitute financial exploitation and theft, regardless of the family relationship involved. The fact that you're physically recovering from a stroke doesn't give anyone the right to dispose of your property without your explicit consent. What can I do to protect my remaining assets and find out what's happened to my belongings? First, we need to secure your financial accounts immediately. If your daughter has been managing your finances, we need to ensure she can't make any additional unauthorized transactions. Second, we need to demand a complete accounting of what's been done with your property. And third, we may need to file for emergency protective orders to prevent any further disposal of your assets. How quickly can we start this process? I can file preliminary motions tomorrow if you're ready to proceed. But Mrs. Whitmore, I need to warn you. Taking legal action against family members, especially your own daughter, is emotionally difficult even when it's necessary. Are you prepared for that reality? I thought about the empty house that had been my home for 25 years. I thought about my grandmother's dining set being loaded onto a truck by strangers. I thought about my first edition book collection, my mother's jewelry, and decades of carefully chosen possessions that represented a lifetime of memories and accomplishments. Attorney Keller, I spent 35 years investigating financial crimes for the FBI. I've seen what happens when people think they can steal from others just because they believe their victims are powerless to fight back. My daughter may think my stroke has made me helpless, but she's about to learn that's the biggest mistake she's ever made. Then let's begin immediately. I'll need you to document everything you can remember about your assets, any conversations you've had with your daughter about your property, and any evidence you have of unauthorized actions. As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before my stroke, a sense of purpose and control. For months, I had been a patient, a victim, someone whose life was being managed by others. Now I was becoming what I had always been, an investigator determined to uncover the truth and hold criminals accountable for their actions. Cassandra had made the mistake of assuming that a stroke would turn me into a helpless victim she could manipulate and rob at will. She was about to discover that while my stroke had temporarily affected my speech and mobility, it had done nothing to diminish my intelligence, my determination, or my ability to fight back when someone tried to steal everything I had worked for. The investigation was just beginning, and I had a feeling that what I discovered was going to be far worse than anything I had imagined so far. Armed with attorney Diana Keller's legal expertise, I spent the next week systematically documenting every asset I could remember from my home and every conversation I'd had with Cassandra since my stroke. The process was emotionally exhausting but professionally familiar. I was building a case the same way I had done hundreds of times during my FBI career. Diana's first strategic move was to contact my bank and investment accounts to freeze any unauthorized transactions and demand complete records of all activity since my stroke. What we discovered in those financial records was so shocking that even Diana, who had handled numerous elder abuse cases, was visibly shaken during our review meeting. "Eleanor, this is far worse than typical family financial exploitation," she said, spreading bank statements across the conference table. "Your daughter hasn't just been managing your affairs, she's been systematically looting your accounts while you've been in rehabilitation." The numbers were staggering. Over the past 10 weeks, Cassandra had written herself checks totaling $127,000 from my main checking account. The memo lines on these checks read estate management services, property maintenance, and healthcare coordination, as if she were billing me for the privilege of stealing from me. But the checking account theft was just the beginning. Brandon, using a power of attorney document I had never signed, had liquidated $340,000 worth of stocks from my investment portfolio. The transactions were all processed through Patricia Wells' office, with notations indicating, quote, client-authorized liquidations for rehabilitation expenses and estate planning. "Diana, I never signed a power of attorney giving anyone access to my investment accounts. And these amounts are far more than my rehabilitation costs, even at the most expensive facility." "That's what concerns me most," Diana replied grimly. "The power of attorney document on file with your investment company appears to have your signature, but we'll need a handwriting expert to verify its authenticity. If it's forged, we're looking at multiple felonies." The investment liquidations had been strategically timed. Small amounts at first, when I was most vulnerable immediately after my stroke, then increasingly larger sums as Cassandra apparently grew more confident that I wouldn't be monitoring my accounts. The most recent liquidation, for $85,000, had occurred just 3 days earlier. "She's still actively stealing from me," I said, feeling sick as I processed the scope of the theft. "Even now, while I'm getting stronger and asking questions, she's continuing to take my money." Diana immediately filed emergency motions to freeze all my accounts and prevent any further unauthorized transactions. She also demanded that Patricia Wells' office provide copies of all documentation authorizing these trades, including the power of attorney that I was certain I had never signed. But the financial theft, devastating as it was only part of the story. Diana had also hired a private investigator, Thomas Reed, to track down what had happened to my household belongings. His preliminary report, delivered 3 days after the financial revelations, painted an even more disturbing picture. "Mrs. Whitmore," Thomas explained during our meeting, "I've traced the movement of items from your home to 3 different locations. Some items went to legitimate storage facilities, but a significant portion was sold through estate sale companies and auction houses." Estate sales. They were literally selling my life away piece by piece while telling me everything was being secured for safekeeping. Thomas showed me photocopied receipts and auction listings that made my blood run cold. My grandmother's mahogany dining set, the table where I had hosted Christmas dinners for 25 years, had been sold to Riverside estate sales for $3,200. The buyer was listed as anonymous private collector. My first edition book collection, valued at nearly $200,000, had been sold in lots through Burlington Rare Books auction house. The listing described them as important 20th century mystery novel collection from estate of deceased collector. Deceased collector. They had told the auction house I was dead. "Mr. Reed, are you telling me that my daughter sold my belongings by claiming I was deceased?" "It appears that way, ma'am. Several of the sales records indicate, quote, estate liquidation and inherited property. The auction house and estate sale companies would have required documentation proving ownership and authority to sell, but if your daughter presented herself as your heir handling your estate, they wouldn't have questioned the transactions." Diana leaned forward intently. "Thomas, do we have copies of the documentation she used to authorize these sales?" "I'm working on obtaining those records." Some auction houses are more cooperative than others, but I should have complete paperwork within a few days. The scope of the deception was breathtaking. While I was fighting to regain my speech and mobility, working hours every day in rehabilitation to rebuild my life, Cassandra and Brandon were systematically dismantling that life and profiting from its destruction. But Thomas wasn't finished with his devastating revelations. "Mrs. Whitmore, there's something else you need to know. Your house is currently listed for sale with Elmwood Realty. The listing agent is Cassandra Brooks Hutchinson. My house. My beautiful Victorian home that I had lovingly maintained for 25 years. The place I was planning to return to when my rehabilitation was complete. Cassandra was selling it out from under me. How is that even possible? I never authorized the sale of my home." The listing documentation shows a power of attorney authorizing the sale, along with what appears to be your signature on a listing agreement. The asking price is $1.3 million, and according to the listing agent I spoke with yesterday, there are already 2 serious offers being considered. Diana was furiously taking notes. "Thomas, we need copies of all the real estate documents immediately." "Eleanor, this power of attorney is clearly either forged or obtained under duress. No one has the right to sell your home without your explicit consent, family or not. What happens if the house sells before we can stop it?" "We'll file an emergency injunction today to halt any sale proceedings, but Eleanor, I need to warn you, your daughter has been very sophisticated in how she's structured these thefts. She's used legitimate businesses, created official-looking documentation, and followed legal processes. Stopping this and recovering your assets is going to be a complex and expensive legal battle." That evening, I called Cassandra for what I knew would be our final conversation as daughter and mother. I had decided to give her one chance to explain herself before I unleashed the full force of legal action against her. "Hi, Mom, how are you feeling today?" Her voice was bright and cheerful, as if she hadn't spent the morning considering offers on my home while stealing my life savings. "Cassandra, I need to ask you some direct questions, and I need honest answers." "Of course, Mom. What's on your mind?" "I've learned that my house is listed for sale. Can you explain that to me?" The pause was so long I wondered if the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost all its warmth. "Mom, who told you that?" "That's not what I asked you. I asked you to explain why my house is for sale without my knowledge or consent. Look, we were going to discuss this with you when you were stronger. The doctors think you're going to need long-term care, and the house is just too big and complicated for you to manage anymore. We thought it would be better to handle the sale now, while the market is good, so the money could be available for your future care needs." "Cassandra, my doctors have told me repeatedly that I'm making excellent progress and should be able to return to independent living." "Who exactly said I needed long-term care?" "Well, Brandon consulted with some specialists, and they felt that stroke patients your age often experience cognitive decline even after initial recovery. We're just trying to be proactive about your future needs." Specialists she wouldn't name, giving opinions about cognitive decline that contradicted every assessment I'd received from my actual medical team. The lies were becoming more elaborate and desperate. "And what about my belongings, my furniture, my books, my mother's jewelry?" "Everything valuable is in secure storage, Mom. We've been very careful about preserving your important items." "Cassandra, I know that's not true. I know about the estate sales. I know about the auction house. I know you've been selling my possessions while telling me they're in storage." The silence that followed was deafening. When she finally spoke, her voice was completely different, cold, calculated, and devoid of any pretense of love or concern. "Mom, I think you're getting confused. The stroke has affected your memory more than you realize. Maybe we should have your doctors evaluate your cognitive function again." She was trying to gaslight me, to make me question my own sanity and competence. It was a manipulation tactic I had seen criminals use countless times when confronted with evidence of their crimes. "Cassandra, I am not confused. I have bank records showing you've stolen over $127,000 from my checking account. I have investment records showing unauthorized liquidations totaling $340,000. I have auction receipts showing my belongings being sold as, quote, estate items. And I have real estate listings showing my house for sale without my consent. Mom, you're really starting to worry me. These paranoid thoughts aren't healthy. Maybe we need to have you evaluated by a psychiatrist. The only person who needs to be evaluated is you, by a criminal court judge. I've hired an attorney, Cassandra. I've filed legal motions to stop the sale of my house and freeze my accounts. And I'm going to prosecute you and Brandon for theft, fraud, and elder abuse. You can't be serious. Mom, we're your family. We've been taking care of you. Taking care of me? You've been robbing me blind while I was helpless in a hospital bed. You've sold my mother's jewelry, my grandmother's furniture, and my life's collection of books. You've stolen nearly $500,000 from my accounts, and you've tried to sell my home out from under me. That's not taking care of me. That's destroying me. Mom, you're being hysterical. When you calm down and think about this rationally, you'll realize we were just trying to help you transition to a more appropriate living situation for someone in your condition. My condition? Cassandra, my condition is that I'm a stroke survivor who is recovering beautifully and looking forward to rebuilding my life. Your condition is that you're a thief and a liar who saw your mother's medical crisis as an opportunity to get rich quick. If you pursue this legal nonsense, you'll destroy our family. Is money really more important to you than your relationship with your daughter and grandchildren? It was the final manipulation, using my love for my grandsons as a weapon against me, trying to make me feel guilty for refusing to be robbed. Cassandra, you destroyed our family the moment you decided to steal from me instead of love me. You've made your choice, and now you'll live with the consequences. I hung up the phone and sat in my rehabilitation room, feeling a mixture of heartbreak and determination. My daughter had revealed herself to be a stranger, someone capable of cruelty and greed beyond anything I had imagined possible. But she had made one crucial miscalculation. She had assumed that my stroke would leave me permanently vulnerable and unable to fight back. Instead, it had simply given me time to discover the full scope of her crimes before she could complete her plan to steal everything I had worked for. Now she was about to learn what happens when you try to rob a forensic accountant who has 35 years of experience hunting down criminals exactly like her. The morning after my confrontation with Cassandra, I woke up to discover that she and Brandon were not going to accept defeat quietly. While I had been building my legal case, they had been constructing their own defense strategy, one that was both more sophisticated and more vicious than I could have imagined. My first indication that they were escalating their tactics came at 7:30 a.m. when Dr. Martinez, my speech therapist, knocked on my rehabilitation room door with an unusual expression of concern. Mrs. Whitmore, I need to speak with you about something rather delicate. I received a call yesterday evening from someone claiming to be your son-in-law. He expressed some concerns about your mental state and suggested that we might need to reevaluate your cognitive function. The audacity was breathtaking. Brandon was trying to use my own medical team against me. Dr. Martinez, what exactly did he say? He claimed that you've been making paranoid accusations against family members, that you've been confused about financial matters, and that you might be experiencing post-stroke psychological complications that weren't previously apparent. And what was your response to these claims? Dr. Martinez smiled slightly. I told him that in my professional opinion, your cognitive function, memory, and judgment are all excellent. In fact, I've been consistently impressed by your mental clarity throughout your recovery. I also informed him that any concerns about a patient's mental state need to come through proper medical channels, not through unsolicited phone calls from family members. Did he accept that assessment? He was quite persistent. He suggested that family members sometimes notice subtle changes that medical professionals might miss, and he offered to provide, quote, documentation of your alleged cognitive issues. When I declined to discuss your case further without your consent, he became rather aggressive and suggested that our facility might be liable if we discharge someone who isn't mentally competent to live independently. This was clearly Brandon's lawyer training at work, trying to create legal pressure on my medical team to declare me incompetent. If he could get my doctors to question my mental capacity, it would undermine my ability to pursue legal action against him and Cassandra. Dr. Martinez, I want you to know that I am currently involved in a legal dispute with my daughter and son-in-law regarding financial theft. They have strong motivations to have me declared mentally incompetent. I suspected as much. Mrs. Whitmore, I want to assure you that your medical team will base our assessments solely on clinical evidence, not on pressure from family members with potential conflicts of interest. But Brandon's campaign to undermine my credibility was just beginning. Later that morning, I received a call from Jennifer Walsh, my case manager, who informed me that someone had contacted the state's Adult Protective Services office to file a complaint about my care at Riverside Recovery Institute. Mrs. Whitmore, APS received an anonymous report claiming that you're being financially exploited by someone at this facility, that you're not receiving appropriate medical care, and that you may be mentally incapacitated but not receiving proper psychiatric evaluation. Anonymous report? Let me guess. The caller was very concerned about my welfare but didn't want to identify themselves. Exactly. The APS investigator will need to interview you and review your case, but I wanted to give you advance notice. These investigations can be disruptive, even when the allegations are completely unfounded. I realized that Brandon and Cassandra were trying to flood the system with conflicting reports and accusations. If they could create enough official documentation questioning my competence, they might be able to delay or derail my legal case against them. That afternoon, I called Diana Keller to warn her about these new tactics. "Eleanor, this is actually more common than you might think," she said grimly. When family members are caught stealing from elderly relatives, they often try to flip the script by claiming the victim is mentally incompetent or being manipulated by others. It's a desperate move, but it can be effective if we don't stay ahead of it. What can we do to protect against these attacks? We're going to be proactive. I'm arranging for you to have a comprehensive mental competency evaluation by Dr. Sarah Chen, one of the most respected neuropsychologists in the state. We'll document your cognitive abilities so thoroughly that no court will question your capacity to make decisions about your own life. But even as Diana was arranging for professional documentation of my mental competence, Cassandra was launching a more personal and devastating attack. That evening, I received a call that I initially thought was a wrong number. "Is this Eleanor Whitmore?" The voice was unfamiliar, a young woman who sounded nervous. "Yes, this is Eleanor. May I ask who's calling?" "My name is Jessica Rodriguez. I'm Emma Rodriguez's daughter. My mother worked as your housekeeper?" Emma's daughter. I remembered Emma mentioning Jessica, who was studying nursing at Burlington Community College. "Of course, Jessica. How is your mother? I've been concerned about her since she seemed so uncomfortable when I tried to call her recently." Jessica's voice became even more strained. "Mrs. Whitmore, that's why I'm calling. My mother is really upset about something, and she asked me to contact you. She said your daughter told her some things that don't sound right, and she's worried about you." "What kind of things did my daughter tell her?" "Miss Cassandra came to our house last week and told my mother that you've been having serious mental problems since your stroke. She said you've been making up stories about people stealing from you, and that you might be dangerous if anyone contradicts your delusions." Dangerous! Cassandra was now painting me as not just mentally incompetent, but potentially violent. "Jessica, did your mother believe these claims?" "That's just it. My mother has worked for you for 6 years, and she said you've always been the kindest, most rational person she knows. She can't believe you would suddenly become paranoid or aggressive." But Miss Cassandra was very convincing, and she showed my mother some kind of medical documents that supposedly proved you were having psychological problems. "What kind of medical documents?" My mother couldn't read them very well. Her English reading isn't perfect, but Miss Cassandra said they were reports from your doctor saying you were having hallucinations and memory problems. Forged medical documents. Cassandra was creating fake psychiatric evaluations to support her claims about my mental incompetence. "Jessica, is your mother willing to speak with me directly?" She wants to, but she's scared. Miss Cassandra told her that if she talks to you, it might make your mental condition worse, and that she could get in legal trouble for upsetting someone with psychiatric problems. Would you please tell your mother that I'm not having any mental problems, that I'm recovering very well from my stroke, and that I would love to speak with her? Also, please tell her that my daughter has been lying about my condition for reasons that have nothing to do with my health. After I hung up with Jessica, I sat in my room feeling the full weight of Cassandra's campaign against me. She wasn't just stealing my money and possessions, she was systematically destroying my reputation and relationships to ensure that no one would believe me when I accused her of theft. The next morning brought even more disturbing news. Patricia Wells, my financial advisor, called with what she presented as, quote, growing concerns about my mental state. Eleanor, I've received some troubling information from Cassandra about your recent behavior. She's told me that you've been making paranoid accusations about your family, and that you may not be thinking clearly about financial matters. Patricia, what specific concerns has she raised? Well, she mentioned that you've been claiming that money is missing from your accounts, when in fact all withdrawals have been properly authorized for your care and estate planning. She's worried that you might be developing the kind of confusion and suspicion that sometimes affects stroke patients. Patricia, I have documentation showing unauthorized withdrawals totaling nearly $500,000. Are you telling me that you believe those transactions were all legitimate? Eleanor, I understand that large financial transactions can be confusing when you're dealing with health issues, but everything has been properly documented and authorized through the power of attorney that you signed. I never signed a power of attorney authorizing those transactions. There was a pause before Patricia responded, and when she did, her tone had shifted slightly. Eleanor, I have the document right here in your file. It clearly bears your signature and was properly notarized. If you don't remember signing it, that might be something you should discuss with your medical team. She was gaslighting me, using my stroke as an explanation for why I might not remember signing documents that I was certain I had never seen. But there was something in her tone that made me suspect she might not be entirely convinced by Cassandra's story. Patricia, I'd like to schedule a meeting to review all my account activity and documentation in person. Can we arrange that? Of course, but Eleanor, I think it would be best if Cassandra could join us for that meeting. Given the concerns about your cognitive state, it would be appropriate to have a family member present to help ensure you understand everything correctly. I don't need a family member present to understand my own financial records, Patricia. I was a forensic accountant for 35 years. I understand, but Cassandra has legal authority to act on your behalf, and frankly, some of your recent statements have been concerning. I think having her there would be in everyone's best interest. The more Patricia talked, the more I realized that she had been either complicit in or deceived by Cassandra's scheme from the beginning. Either way, she was now part of the problem rather than part of the solution. That afternoon, Diana called with an update that confirmed my suspicions about the scope of the conspiracy. Eleanor, I've reviewed the power of attorney document that's on file with your investment company. The signature appears to be forged, but it's a very sophisticated forgery. More importantly, the notarization is fraudulent. The notary public whose stamp appears on the document says she never notarized anything for you and has never met you. So we have proof of document forgery and fraud? We do, but there's a complication. The forged power of attorney was used to authorize not just the investment liquidations, but also changes to your bank account access, your insurance beneficiaries, and your estate planning documents. Cassandra and Brandon have created an entire alternative reality in which you've supposedly given them complete control over your life and assets. How extensive is this fraudulent documentation? Based on what I've discovered so far, they've forged your signature on over a dozen different documents spanning several months. They've created a paper trail that makes it look like you voluntarily transferred control of your entire estate to them, dating back to shortly after your stroke. Diana, this isn't just theft. This is a comprehensive identity theft and fraud operation. Exactly. And Eleanor, I suspect this goes beyond just Cassandra and Brandon. The level of sophistication suggests they may have had help from professionals, possibly including your financial advisor, and potentially others who had access to your personal information and financial accounts. As I hung up the phone, I realized that I wasn't just fighting my daughter and son-in-law. I was fighting an entire network of people who had conspired to systematically destroy my life while I was most vulnerable. But they had made one critical error in their calculations. They had assumed that because I was physically weakened by my stroke, I would be intellectually and emotionally weakened as well. Instead, every day of my recovery had made me stronger, sharper, and more determined to see justice done. Cassandra wanted to play psychological warfare. She had picked a fight with someone who had spent decades outmaneuvering criminals far more sophisticated than she was. The gloves were about to come off. 3 days after Diana had confirmed the extensive document forgeries, I received a call that caught me completely off guard. It was from Jeremy, my 16-year-old grandson, and his voice was thick with emotion. "Grandma Eleanor, it's Jeremy. I need to talk to you about something really important." My heart immediately went out to him. Jeremy and his twin brother Nathan had always been the lights of my life, and I had been heartbroken that Cassandra hadn't brought them to visit me during my rehabilitation. I had assumed she was protecting them from seeing me in a weakened state. "Jeremy, sweetheart, I've missed you and Nathan so much. How are you both doing?" "Grandma, that's what I need to talk to you about. Mom told us that you've been really sick since your stroke, not just physically, but mentally. She said you've been saying things about our family that aren't true, and that you might not remember us very well." The manipulation was even more heartless than I had imagined. Cassandra was using my own grandchildren as weapons against me, poisoning their relationship with me by making them believe I was mentally deteriorating. "Jeremy, I want you to listen to me very carefully. My mind is completely clear. I remember everything about you and Nathan, your birthdays, your favorite foods, the stories I used to read to you. I love you both exactly as much as I always have. But Mom showed us some papers from your doctors that said you were having problems with reality and memory. She said that's why we haven't been able to visit you." "Jeremy, those papers aren't real. Your mother has been lying to you about my condition. I'm recovering very well from my stroke, and there's nothing wrong with my mind or my memory." There was a long pause before Jeremy spoke again, and when he did, his voice was smaller, more uncertain. "Grandma, Mom said you might say that. She said people with mental problems often don't realize they have them, and that you might try to turn us against our family." The calculated cruelty of using my grandsons to deliver this psychological manipulation was breathtaking. Cassandra was forcing these teenage boys to choose between believing their grandmother or believing their mother, and she had given them fraudulent evidence to support her lies. "Jeremy, I understand this is confusing and frightening for you, but I need you to trust the relationship we've always had. Have I ever lied to you before?" "No, Grandma, never." "Then please trust me now when I tell you that your mother has been stealing my money and my belongings while I've been in the hospital. That's why she doesn't want me to see you, because she's afraid you'll figure out what she's really been doing." "Grandma, that's a really serious thing to say about Mom." "I know it is, sweetheart, and I wish it weren't true, but sometimes people we love do terrible things, and we have to be brave enough to see the truth, even when it hurts." Jeremy was quiet for a long moment before he spoke again. "Grandma, there's something else. Mom wants to come see you tomorrow with Nathan and me. She said it's time for us to say goodbye to you before you get worse. Say goodbye." Cassandra was setting up what she intended to be our final meeting, probably planning to use my grandson's presence to pressure me into dropping my legal case against her. "Jeremy, I would love to see you and Nathan, but I want you to understand that this isn't a goodbye visit. I'm not dying, and I'm not getting worse. I'm getting stronger every day." After I hung up with Jeremy, I immediately called Diana to strategize about this unexpected development. "Eleanor, this visit is likely part of their legal strategy," Diana warned. "They're going to try to use your emotional connection to your grandchildren to pressure you into some kind of settlement or agreement. You need to be very careful about what you say and do during this meeting." "Should I refuse to see them?" No, I think you should see them, but on your terms. I want you to record the conversation if possible, and I want you to have a witness present. Also, I'm going to give you some documents to review with Cassandra during the meeting. Let's see how she responds when confronted with specific evidence of her crimes. The next afternoon, Cassandra arrived at Riverside with Jeremy and Nathan. I hadn't seen my grandsons in almost a year, and they had both grown taller and more mature. But there was something different about them, a guardedness that hadn't been there before, a distance that broke my heart. Cassandra, meanwhile, looked like she had been under tremendous stress. Her usually perfect appearance was slightly disheveled, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite conceal. "Hello, Mom," she said, her voice carefully modulated to sound warm and concerned. "You look wonderful, much better than I expected." "Thank you for bringing the boys, Cassandra. I've missed them terribly." I hugged Jeremy and Nathan, and while they returned my embrace, I could feel their uncertainty and confusion. Cassandra had clearly prepared them for this visit, with specific instructions about how to interact with their mentally compromised grandmother. "Grandma Eleanor," Nathan said carefully, "how are you feeling? Mom said your stroke was really serious." "I'm feeling much stronger, Nathan. My physical therapy is going very well, and I should be able to go home soon." Cassandra jumped in quickly. "Well, Mom, that's actually something we need to discuss. The doctors have some concerns about your ability to live independently, and we've been looking at some really nice assisted living facilities that might be better suited to your needs." "Which doctors have expressed these concerns, Cassandra? Because my entire medical team here has been very positive about my recovery and my prospects for independent living." "Well, Brandon consulted with some specialists about post-stroke care for people your age, and they felt that living alone might not be safe anymore." I reached into the folder Diana had prepared for me and pulled out a letter from Dr. Chen, the neuropsychologist who had conducted my competency evaluation the previous week. "Cassandra, this is a comprehensive cognitive assessment conducted just last week. It documents that my mental function is completely normal for my age, with no signs of dementia, confusion, or impaired judgment. Would you like to read it?" Her face went slightly pale as she glanced at the document. "Mom, I'm sure your doctors here are trying to be encouraging, but they might not be seeing the whole picture." "What picture would that be?" Jeremy and Nathan were watching this exchange with obvious discomfort, clearly sensing the tension between their mother and grandmother but not understanding its source. Cassandra seemed to realize that her usual manipulation tactics weren't working in front of witnesses who could see how articulate and clear-thinking I was. She shifted to what I recognized as her backup strategy. "Mom, I think we need to talk about something important. The boys and I have been discussing your situation, and we're worried about the stress this legal action is putting on our family." "What legal action are you referring to, Cassandra?" "This whole business with lawyers and accusations. It's been very upsetting for Jeremy and Nathan to hear that their grandmother is making these kinds of claims about their mother." I looked at my grandsons, who were clearly uncomfortable being used as emotional leverage in this conversation. "Boys, did your mother tell you that I've accused her of stealing from me?" Jeremy nodded reluctantly. "She said you think she took your money, but that it was all authorized, and that you just don't remember giving permission. And what do you think about that?" Nathan spoke up. "Grandma, we don't understand any of this legal stuff. We just want our family to be okay again." Cassandra leaned forward, her voice taking on a pleading tone. "Mom, that's exactly what we want too. Look, maybe there have been some misunderstandings about the financial arrangements. Maybe we didn't communicate clearly about what needed to be done while you were recovering." This was it, the false reconciliation offer. She was going to propose some kind of compromise that would allow her to keep most of what she had stolen in exchange for avoiding criminal prosecution. "What kind of misunderstandings are you referring to?" "Well, maybe we moved too quickly on some of the estate planning and property management decisions. Maybe we should have waited until you were feeling stronger to discuss everything with you." "Cassandra, are you saying that you made decisions about my property and finances without my consent?" "I'm saying that maybe we interpreted your wishes incorrectly. Maybe we should sit down with lawyers, both of us, and work out an arrangement that makes everyone comfortable. Jeremy looked at his mother with surprise. Mom, I thought you said Grandma gave you permission to handle her money. Cassandra's composure slipped slightly. Jeremy, it's complicated. When someone has a stroke, sometimes the legal paperwork isn't as clear as it should be. I pulled out another document from Diana's folder, copies of the forged power of attorney and the fraudulent notarization. Cassandra, this is the power of attorney document that was used to authorize transactions on my investment accounts. The signature is forged, and the notarization is fraudulent. The notary public has confirmed that she never notarized any document for me. Nathan leaned forward to look at the papers. What does that mean? It means that someone created fake legal documents using my name to steal my money. Cassandra stood up abruptly. Mom, I think you're getting too worked up about this. Maybe we should continue this conversation another time when you're feeling calmer. I'm perfectly calm, Cassandra. I'm also perfectly clear about what's been done to me. You've stolen nearly $500,000 from my accounts, sold my possessions without my consent, and tried to sell my house out from under me. Now you're trying to use my grandsons to pressure me into dropping my legal case against you. Jeremy and Nathan were staring at their mother with shocked expressions. This was clearly the first time they were hearing specific details about the scope of the alleged theft. Grandma, Jeremy said slowly, is that really true? Did Mom sell your things? Yes, Jeremy. My grandmother's dining set, my book collection, even my mother's jewelry. While I was in the hospital recovering from my stroke, your mother was systematically selling everything I owned. Nathan turned to his mother. Mom, is that true? Cassandra's careful composure finally cracked completely. Boys, your grandmother is not well. She's making up these stories because she's confused and scared about getting older. We need to get her some help. I'm not making up anything, Cassandra. I have receipts from the auction houses and estate sale companies. I have bank records showing the unauthorized withdrawals. I have documentation proving that you forged my signature on legal documents. Jeremy stood up, his young face showing a mixture of anger and heartbreak. Mom, you told us Grandma was crazy, but she doesn't sound crazy. She sounds like she's telling the truth. Jeremy, sit down. You don't understand what's happening here. I understand that you've been lying to us about Grandma being sick in her mind. I understand that you told us she might not remember us, but she remembers everything about us perfectly. Nathan joined his brother. Mom, why would you lie to us about Grandma? Why haven't you let us see her until now? Cassandra looked trapped, her manipulation tactics falling apart in front of her own children. When she spoke again, her voice was sharp and desperate. Fine. You want the truth? Your grandmother is a selfish old woman who cares more about money than family. She's going to destroy our family with these ridiculous accusations instead of being grateful that we took care of her affairs when she couldn't. The mask had finally come off completely. In front of her own sons, Cassandra had revealed her true character, someone who saw caring for a stroke victim as a burden rather than a responsibility, and who felt entitled to payment for that burden in the form of theft. Jeremy looked at his mother with an expression I had never seen on his young face. Pure disappointment and disillusionment. Mom, we need to go, now. As Cassandra herded the boys toward the door, Nathan turned back to me. Grandma Eleanor, I'm sorry we believed her instead of you. It's not your fault, sweetheart. None of this is your fault. After they left, I sat in my room feeling a complex mixture of emotions. The confrontation had been painful but necessary. My grandsons had finally seen their mother's true character, which was heartbreaking for them but essential for my case. Most importantly, Cassandra's desperate attempt to use my love for my grandchildren against me had backfired spectacularly. Instead of pressuring me to drop my legal case, she had provided me with witnesses to her own confession of guilt. The false reconciliation had failed, and now she was going to face the full consequences of her crimes. The day after the disastrous family meeting, I woke up feeling optimistic for the first time in weeks. Diana had assured me that Cassandra's behavior in front of the boys had actually strengthened our legal case, and my medical team was preparing my discharge papers for the following week. After nearly 3 months of rehabilitation, I was finally going home to start rebuilding my life. That sense of hope lasted exactly until 9:47 a.m., when Dr. Santos called me with news that turned my world upside down. "Mrs. Whitmore, I need you to remain calm while I tell you something very serious. There's been a development with your case that requires immediate attention." "What kind of development?" "Your daughter filed an emergency petition yesterday afternoon requesting that you be placed under an involuntary psychiatric hold. She's claiming that your behavior during yesterday's family visit demonstrated that you're a danger to yourself and others." The room seemed to spin around me. An involuntary psychiatric hold meant being transferred to a locked mental health facility, where I could be held against my will for up to 72 hours while being evaluated for mental competency. During that time, all my legal proceedings would be suspended, and Cassandra would have complete control over my affairs. "Dr. Santos, that's impossible. You know my mental state is completely normal." "I absolutely know that, which is why I'm calling to warn you. The petition includes what appears to be video evidence of you making, quote, threatening statements toward your family members and, quote, exhibiting paranoid delusions about financial theft." Video evidence. Cassandra had recorded portions of our meeting yesterday, carefully editing out the context and evidence I had presented to make it appear that I was mentally unstable. "When is this petition being heard?" "There's an emergency hearing scheduled for 2 p.m. today. Mrs. Whitmore, I need you to understand how serious this is. If the judge grants this petition, you'll be immediately transferred to Burlington Psychiatric Hospital for evaluation, regardless of your actual mental state." "Can they do that without my consent?" "Unfortunately, yes. In cases where someone is alleged to be a danger to themselves or others due to mental illness, the law allows for involuntary commitment pending professional evaluation." I called Diana immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed her number. "Eleanor, I just received notice of the petition," she said grimly. "This is an incredibly aggressive move, even for someone as desperate as Cassandra. She's essentially trying to have you declared legally insane. Can we fight it?" "We're going to try, but emergency psychiatric holds have a very low standard of proof. The judge only needs to believe there's a reasonable possibility that you might be mentally unstable. Cassandra's edited video footage, combined with her claims about your, quote, deteriorating condition, might be enough to convince a judge who doesn't know you." "What happens if they succeed?" "If you're placed on psychiatric hold, all your legal proceedings are suspended until you're declared competent. Cassandra would maintain control of your finances and property during that time. Even worse, being involuntarily committed creates a permanent record that could be used to question your competency in future legal proceedings." "Diana, this is insane. I'm clearly not mentally ill." "I know that, but Cassandra has created a very convincing narrative. She's claiming that your stroke caused delayed psychological complications, that you've become paranoid and potentially violent, and that your accusations against her are actually evidence of mental deterioration." At 11 a.m., I received a call that made the situation even more desperate. It was Jeremy, and he was crying. "Grandma, Eleanor, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "Jeremy, what's wrong? What's happened?" "Mom made Nathan and me sign papers saying that you threatened us yesterday. She said if we didn't sign them, you might hurt us or other people, and it would be our fault. The cruelty was beyond anything I had imagined. Cassandra was forcing her own children to provide false testimony that would result in my involuntary commitment to a psychiatric facility." "Jeremy, what did these papers say?" "They said that you told us you were going to, quote, destroy our family and that you seemed really angry and confused. Mom said these statements proved you were dangerous and needed special medical help." "Jeremy, you know that's not what happened. You were there. You heard the entire conversation." "I know, Grandma. I know you weren't threatening us. You were just trying to explain what Mom had done, but she said if we didn't sign the papers, You might end up hurting yourself or someone else, and it would be our fault if that happened. Sweetheart, you're not responsible for any of this. Your mother put you in an impossible position. Grandma, is it true that they're going to take you to a mental hospital? They're going to try, Jeremy. Your mother is using those papers you signed to convince a judge that I'm mentally ill. Can't you tell them the truth? Can't you explain what really happened? I'm going to try, but sometimes the legal system believes paperwork more than people. That afternoon, I sat in Burlington County Family Court with Diana, facing the most important hearing of my life. Across the aisle, Cassandra sat with Brandon and their attorney, looking like concerned family members worried about their elderly relatives' deteriorating mental health. The judge, the Honorable Patricia Chen, was a woman in her 50s who specialized in elder care and mental health cases. She had a reputation for being fair but cautious when it came to protecting vulnerable individuals. Brandon's attorney, Michael Stevens, presented their case with devastating effectiveness. He played carefully edited video clips from yesterday's meeting that made me appear agitated and paranoid. He presented the signed statements from Jeremy and Nathan claiming I had threatened them. He introduced fabricated medical reports suggesting I was experiencing post-stroke psychological complications. Your Honor, Stevens argued, Mrs. Whitmore is clearly experiencing serious mental health issues that are making her a danger to herself and her family. She has made wild accusations of financial theft against the very people who have been caring for her during her recovery. She has threatened her own grandchildren. She needs immediate psychiatric intervention before someone gets hurt. Diana fought back with everything she had, presenting Dr. Chen's competency evaluation and testimony from my medical team about my excellent cognitive recovery. But the edited video and the boys' forced statements created a compelling narrative of a mentally unstable elderly woman making paranoid accusations against her loving family. Your Honor, Diana argued, Mrs. Whitmore is the victim of an elaborate financial fraud perpetrated by her own daughter. The so-called quote-quote paranoid accusations are actually well-documented crimes, supported by bank records, forged documents, and other physical evidence. This petition is nothing more than an attempt to silence the victim of elder abuse. Judge Chen reviewed all the submitted evidence carefully, but I could see the uncertainty in her expression. The fabricated documentation was convincing, and the edited video made me appear genuinely unstable. Mrs. Whitmore, the judge said, addressing me directly, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer them calmly and clearly. For the next 20 minutes, Judge Chen conducted an impromptu mental status examination, asking me about current events, basic math problems, and my understanding of the legal proceedings. I answered every question correctly and demonstrated complete cognitive competence. But then Stevens played his trump card. Your Honor, we have one additional piece of evidence that we believe is crucial to this decision. He introduced what appeared to be a medical report from Dr. Richard Morrison, a psychiatrist at Burlington Medical Center, dated just 2 days earlier. The report claimed that I had been secretly evaluated during a consultation visit and had been found to be suffering from post-stroke paranoid psychosis with potential for violent behavior. I had never met Dr. Morrison, had never been to Burlington Medical Center, and had certainly never undergone any psychiatric evaluation there. The report was completely fabricated, but it looked official and professional. Your Honor, Stevens continued, Dr. Morrison's evaluation confirms our concerns about Mrs. Whitmore's mental state. His professional opinion is that she requires immediate psychiatric intervention to prevent potential harm to herself or others. Diana was on her feet immediately. Your Honor, my client has never met Dr. Morrison and has never been evaluated at Burlington Medical Center. This document appears to be fraudulent. Mr. Stevens, Judge Chen said, can you verify the authenticity of this report? Your Honor, Dr. Morrison is available by phone to confirm his evaluation if necessary. I realized with horror that Cassandra and Brandon had found a corrupt psychiatrist willing to create false documentation for their case. The level of sophistication and planning involved in their scheme was staggering. Judge Chen spent several minutes reviewing all the evidence, clearly torn between the compelling documentation presented by Stevens and the obvious cognitive competence I had demonstrated during questioning. Finally, she spoke. "This is one of the most difficult decisions I've had to make in my years on the bench. Mrs. Whitmore, you have demonstrated excellent cognitive function during our conversation today. However, the submitted evidence raises serious concerns about your mental state and potential for harm to yourself or others." My heart sank as I realized which way her decision was going. "I am going to grant a limited 72-hour psychiatric hold for professional evaluation. Mrs. Whitmore will be transferred to Burlington Psychiatric Hospital for comprehensive assessment by qualified mental health professionals." The gavel came down with a sound that felt like a death sentence. Within minutes, hospital security officers were at my side, preparing to transport me to a locked psychiatric facility where I would be held against my will while Cassandra continued to steal everything I owned. As they led me out of the courtroom, I saw Cassandra's face. For just a moment, her mask of concerned family member slipped, and I saw the cold satisfaction of someone who believed she had just won the ultimate victory. But as the courthouse doors closed behind me, I felt something that surprised me. Not despair, but fury. Cassandra thought she had beaten me by having me declared mentally incompetent and locked away. She thought she had finally silenced the one person who could expose her crimes. She had made the biggest mistake of her life. Because the one thing Cassandra didn't understand was that a locked psychiatric ward was still full of people. Doctors, nurses, social workers, and other patients who could witness and document everything that happened there. And if there was one thing I had learned during 35 years of forensic investigation, it was that the truth always finds a way to come out, no matter how many lies are used to bury it. Cassandra wanted to play the game of fraudulent documentation and false testimony. She had just locked herself in a room with someone who was about to show her exactly how that game was played by a professional. The locked steel door of Burlington Psychiatric Hospital's involuntary commitment ward slammed shut behind me with a finality that would have broken most people. But as I stood in that sterile hallway, wearing hospital scrubs and feeling the weight of Cassandra's seemingly complete victory, something extraordinary happened. My forensic investigator instincts didn't just return, they exploded into full operational mode. Within my first hour in the psychiatric ward, I had mentally cataloged every staff member, noted the security protocols, identified the documentation procedures, and begun formulating a strategy that would not only prove my sanity, but expose the entire criminal conspiracy that had put me there. Dr. Amanda Foster, the psychiatrist assigned to my case, was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who had clearly seen every kind of manipulation and deception that brought people to her ward. When she sat down across from me in the small evaluation room, I could see her trying to reconcile the obviously competent woman in front of her with the dramatic documentation that had justified my commitment. "Mrs. Whitmore, I've reviewed the court records and the reports that led to your placement here. I have to say, there's a significant disconnect between what I'm reading and what I'm observing. Dr. Foster, I need you to understand something very important. I'm here because my daughter is attempting to cover up massive financial theft by having me declared mentally incompetent. Everything in that court file is either fabricated or taken out of context. That's a very serious allegation. Can you walk me through what you believe has happened?" For the next 2 hours, I provided Dr. Foster with the most comprehensive and methodical account of Cassandra's crimes that I had ever given. I cited specific dates, dollar amounts, document serial numbers, and witness names with the precision of someone who had spent decades building criminal cases. "Mrs. Whitmore, your account is remarkably detailed and internally consistent. You show no signs of paranoid delusions, cognitive impairment, or any other psychiatric condition that would justify involuntary commitment. Dr. Foster, I need you to do something for me. I need you to contact Dr. Richard Morrison at Burlington Medical Center. and verify that psychiatric evaluation that was presented in court yesterday. I can certainly do that. Why specifically do you want me to check on that report? Because I've never met Dr. Morrison, I've never been to Burlington Medical Center for psychiatric evaluation, and I believe that document is completely fraudulent. Dr. Foster made a note and promised to investigate immediately, but I wasn't content to wait for her verification. While she was conducting her official inquiries, I was going to conduct my own investigation from inside the psychiatric ward. My first ally turned out to be Marcus Chen, a nurse who had worked in psychiatric facilities for over 15 years. Marcus had seen genuine mental illness, and he had also seen people who had been committed under false pretenses, usually by family members seeking to control their assets. "Mrs. Whitmore," Marcus said during his evening rounds, "I've been doing this job for a long time, and you don't present like someone who belongs here. Your speech patterns, your logical thinking, your emotional responses, everything about you suggests a competent adult who's been placed here inappropriately. Marcus, I need your help with something. Can you document my behavior and mental state independently of the official medical records? I want an objective, professional witness to my condition while I'm here." "I can do that. And Mrs. Whitmore, you should know that we're required to report suspected elder abuse to state authorities. If what you're telling me is true, your situation qualifies as financial exploitation and psychological abuse." The next morning brought news that began to shift the balance of power. Dr. Foster called me into her office with an expression that was equal parts anger and disbelief. "Mrs. Whitmore, I have completed my investigation into Dr. Morrison's alleged evaluation. There are some very serious problems with that document." "What did you find?" "First, Dr. Morrison confirmed that he has never met you and has never conducted any evaluation of you. Second, the report contains several technical errors that no qualified psychiatrist would make. Third, the document formatting doesn't match Burlington Medical Center's standard evaluation templates. So the psychiatric report that was used to have me committed is completely fraudulent? It appears so. I'm filing a report with the State Medical Board immediately, and I'm also contacting the District Attorney's Office about potential criminal charges related to document forgery." But Dr. Foster had even more explosive news. "Mrs. Whitmore, when I contacted Burlington Medical Center to verify Dr. Morrison's report, I spoke with their legal department. They informed me that someone had called their office 2 weeks ago claiming to be your power of attorney and requesting copies of your medical records. Did they provide any records? No, because you've never been a patient there. But the person who called provided very specific personal information about you: your social security number, your date of birth, your former address. They were clearly attempting to obtain medical information to support a fraudulent psychiatric evaluation. Dr. Foster, this proves that the psychiatric hold was planned well in advance. Cassandra wasn't reacting to my behavior during our family meeting. She was executing a premeditated plan to have me declared mentally incompetent. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to be filing a report with the court recommending your immediate release. Based on my evaluation, you show no signs of mental illness or cognitive impairment. Furthermore, the evidence suggests that your commitment was obtained through fraudulent documentation. While Dr. Foster was building the medical case for my release, I was working on the legal and criminal aspects of my situation. Using the psychiatric ward's patient phone during designated calling hours, I had contacted not just Diana but also the FBI's Burlington field office. Special Agent Jennifer Walsh specialized in elder fraud cases, and when I explained my situation and my professional background, she immediately understood the implications. Mrs. Whitmore, what you're describing is a sophisticated elder abuse scheme that potentially involves multiple federal crimes: mail fraud, wire fraud, identity theft, and document forgery. The fact that you were involuntarily committed to prevent you from pursuing legal action adds conspiracy and civil rights violations to the potential charges. Agent Walsh, I have documentation of everything. bank records, forged documents, auction receipts, real estate listings. My attorney has compiled a comprehensive case file. I'm going to need to review all of that evidence immediately. Mrs. Whitmore, if what you're telling me is accurate, your daughter and son-in-law are looking at serious federal prison time. But the most significant development came from an unexpected source. Marcus Chen approached me during his evening rounds with news that would change everything. Mrs. Whitmore, I need to tell you about something that happened this afternoon. A woman claiming to be your daughter called the hospital asking about your condition and treatment. What did she want to know? She was asking very specific questions about our medication protocols, our patient monitoring procedures, and how long patients typically remain in involuntary commitment. But Mrs. Whitmore, the questions she was asking weren't the questions of a concerned family member. What do you mean? She was asking about things like whether patients can make phone calls, whether they have access to legal representation, and whether their financial affairs can be managed by family members while they're committed. It sounded like someone who was planning to keep you here indefinitely. Did she say anything else? Yes, and this is the part that really concerned me. She asked whether patients who demonstrate, quote, continued paranoid behavior could be held beyond the standard 72-hour evaluation period. She specifically mentioned that you might become, quote, 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 quote. I realized that Cassandra was already planning her next move. If she could convince the psychiatric staff that I was becoming more unstable during my commitment, she might be able to extend my stay indefinitely. Meanwhile, she would have complete control of my finances and could finish liquidating my remaining assets. Marcus, I need you to document that conversation in detail. I also need you to be aware that my daughter may try to manipulate information about my behavior here to justify extending my commitment. Mrs. Whitmore, I want you to know that several staff members have already noted that you're one of the most rational and competent people we've ever had in this ward. If anyone tries to claim you're demonstrating unstable behavior, we have documentation to contradict those claims. That night, lying in the narrow hospital bed in the locked psychiatric ward, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before my stroke. Complete clarity about my purpose and absolute confidence in my ability to achieve it. Cassandra thought she had won by having me locked away, but she had actually given me something invaluable: time to think, plan, and gather allies. More importantly, she had made a critical tactical error by committing crimes: document forgery, fraudulent medical reports, conspiracy that left clear evidence trails. Every phone call she made to the hospital, every attempt to manipulate my treatment, every day she continued to steal from my accounts while I was involuntarily committed, was adding to the criminal case against her. By morning, I would be released with professional documentation of my mental competence. Diana would file motions for emergency asset recovery. Agent Walsh would open a federal investigation. And Dr. Foster would report the fraudulent psychiatric evaluation to both medical and criminal authorities. But most importantly, I would emerge from this psychiatric hole not as the broken victim Cassandra expected, but as someone who had transformed completely, from a trusting mother into an implacable enemy who would use every skill she had learned during 35 years of hunting criminals to systematically destroy the people who had tried to destroy her. Cassandra wanted to play psychological warfare with fabricated medical records and forced testimony? She was about to discover what it felt like to be investigated by someone who understood exactly how to build an airtight criminal case. Exactly 67 hours after being committed, I walked out of Burlington Psychiatric Hospital with Dr. Foster's comprehensive report declaring me mentally competent, Marcus Chen's detailed documentation of my rational behavior, and most importantly, a federal case number from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Cassandra's plan to silence me had spectacularly backfired. Instead of a broken victim, she had created a fully armed enemy with federal law enforcement backing. Diana was waiting for me in the hospital lobby with news that made my newfound confidence surge even higher. Eleanor, while you were committed, Cassandra made several critical mistakes. She assumed you were safely locked away and unable to interfere with her plans, so she accelerated her theft operation. What did she do? She liquidated another $180,000 from your investment accounts yesterday, claiming it was for extended psychiatric care expenses. She also accepted an offer on your house and signed preliminary sale documents. Most damaging of all, she called Patricia Wells to discuss transferring your remaining assets into accounts that she could access more easily. She continued stealing while I was involuntarily committed? Exactly. Which means we now have evidence of ongoing financial crimes committed while you were clearly unable to consent to any transactions. It's the strongest possible proof of theft and exploitation. But Diana had even better news waiting. Eleanor, Patricia Wells called me this morning. She wants to meet with us immediately. Within 2 hours, I was sitting across from Patricia in her office at Millbrook Wealth Management, and the conversation that followed exceeded my wildest expectations. Eleanor, I owe you a sincere apology, Patricia began, her professional composure clearly shaken. I've been manipulated by your daughter for months, and I should have recognized what was happening much earlier. Patricia, what exactly has Cassandra told you about my condition? She convinced me that your stroke had caused significant cognitive impairment, and that you were experiencing paranoid delusions about financial theft. She provided what appeared to be medical documentation supporting these claims. And you believed her assessments rather than speaking with me directly? Patricia looked genuinely remorseful. Eleanor, Cassandra was very convincing, and the medical documents seemed legitimate. She also implied that direct communication with you might worsen your psychological state. I thought I was protecting you by working through her. What changed your mind? Several things. First, when you called me a few weeks ago, you sounded completely rational and cogent. Nothing like someone experiencing cognitive decline. Second, some of the recent transaction requests have been extremely suspicious. Patricia pulled out a thick file of documents. Eleanor, yesterday Cassandra requested that I liquidate your entire remaining portfolio, nearly $400,000, and transfer the funds to an account that she controls. When I asked for additional documentation, she became aggressive and threatened to move your business to another firm. Did you process the liquidation? No, because something about her behavior triggered my compliance training. I decided to research the power of attorney documents more carefully, and that's when I discovered some serious problems. Patricia showed me copies of the forged power of attorney that had been used to authorize transactions on my accounts. The notarization on this document is fraudulent. I contacted the notary public whose stamp appears here, and she confirmed that she never notarized any documents for you. Eleanor, I've been processing transactions based on forged legal documents. Patricia, are you willing to testify about these forgeries and about Cassandra's attempts to manipulate you? Absolutely. I'm also filing a report with the Securities and Exchange Commission about the fraudulent documentation. Eleanor, I'm horrified that I was used as an accomplice in this scheme, even unknowingly. While Patricia was preparing her formal statements, Special Agent Walsh was conducting her own investigation with results that revealed the full scope of Cassandra's criminal enterprise. Mrs. Whitmore, Agent Walsh explained during our meeting at the FBI field office, your case has opened up a much larger investigation. We've discovered that your daughter and son-in-law have been involved in similar schemes targeting other elderly individuals. Other victims? At least 3 that we've identified so far. The pattern is identical. They identify elderly people with substantial assets, create medical crises or emergencies that justify taking control of financial affairs, then systematically liquidate assets while keeping victims isolated from independent verification. How did they find these other victims? Brandon Hutchinson has been using his legal practice to identify potential targets. He specializes in estate planning for elderly clients, which gives him access to detailed financial information about vulnerable individuals. Agent Walsh showed me files on 3 other cases that were eerily similar to my own experience. Mrs. Whitmore, this is a sophisticated criminal enterprise, not just family theft. We're looking at federal charges of wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, elder abuse, and racketeering. What kind of sentences are we talking about? Given the amounts involved and the pattern of targeting vulnerable elderly victims, your daughter and son-in-law are potentially facing 15 to 20 years in federal prison. But even as the federal case was building, Diana was pursuing immediate relief through the civil courts. She had filed emergency motions to freeze all of Cassandra's accounts, halt the sale of my house, and recover assets that had already been liquidated. Eleanor, we've made significant progress on asset recovery. The judge granted our emergency motion to stop the house sale, and we've identified most of your belongings in various auction houses and estate sale companies. Can we get my things back? Many of them, yes. Several auction houses are cooperating with our investigation once they learned that the items were sold using fraudulent documentation. Your book collection, for instance, is still at Burlington Rare Books because the sale was completed just days ago. What about my grandmother's dining set? That's going to be more complicated because it was sold weeks ago to a private collector, but we have legal grounds to recover it as stolen property. Diana had also arranged for a private investigator to conduct a comprehensive financial analysis of all transactions involving my accounts over the past year. Eleanor, the investigator's preliminary report shows that Cassandra and Brandon have stolen approximately $670,000 from your various accounts. That includes the investment liquidations, the checking account withdrawals, and the proceeds from selling your belongings. $670,000? And that's just what we can trace so far. The total could be higher once we complete the full forensic accounting. But the most satisfying development came when Thomas Reed, my private investigator, delivered news about Cassandra and Brandon's current situation. Mrs. Whitmore, your daughter and son-in-law are in complete panic mode. They know their scheme is falling apart, and they're making increasingly desperate moves that are only making their legal situation worse. What are they doing? Yesterday, they tried to withdraw $50,000 in cash from an account containing proceeds from your stolen assets. When the bank questioned the large cash withdrawal, Brandon became belligerent and threatened legal action against the bank employees. They're trying to convert stolen assets to untraceable cash? Exactly. They're also attempting to sell Brandon's law practice and liquidate their own assets, apparently preparing to flee the jurisdiction. Thomas showed me surveillance photos of Cassandra and Brandon visiting multiple banks and meeting with real estate agents. Mrs. Whitmore, they've also been calling airlines asking about last-minute international flights. I believe they're planning to leave the country before they can be arrested. This information prompted Agent Walsh to accelerate the federal investigation timeline. Mrs. Whitmore, we're moving to arrest your daughter and son-in-law tomorrow morning. We have enough evidence to charge them immediately, and we can't risk them fleeing the jurisdiction. What about my grandsons? Jeremy and Nathan will be placed with temporary guardians until this situation is resolved. Both boys have actually been cooperating with our investigation. They've provided statements about being forced to sign false documents and being lied to about your mental condition. That evening, I sat in my hotel room, reviewing the mountain of evidence that had been compiled over the past few days. Bank records, forged documents, auction receipts, witness statements, surveillance footage. The case against Cassandra and Brandon was overwhelming. But what struck me most was how completely the balance of power had shifted. Just a week ago, I had been a helpless victim, locked in a psychiatric ward while my daughter stole everything I owned. Now I was working with federal agents, securities regulators, and financial institutions to systematically dismantle a criminal enterprise and recover stolen assets. Cassandra had thought she was playing chess against a vulnerable elderly woman. Instead, she had been playing against someone with 35 years of experience, hunting down financial criminals. Every move she had made, The forged documents, the fraudulent psychiatric evaluation, the attempts to silence me through involuntary commitment, had left evidence trails that I knew exactly how to follow and exploit. Tomorrow morning, federal agents would arrest my daughter and son-in-law on multiple felony charges. The house sale would be permanently halted. The stolen assets would be frozen and recovered. And I would finally be able to return to my own home, to begin rebuilding my life. But most importantly, Cassandra's reign of manipulation and theft would be over forever. She had bet everything on her ability to steal from her own mother and get away with it. Tomorrow, she would discover what happens when you try to rob someone who spent her entire career making sure that criminals face the consequences of their choices. At 6:47 a.m. on a crisp October morning, I stood in the parking lot of the Burlington FBI field office watching through binoculars as federal agents simultaneously raided Cassandra's house in Elmwood Estates and Brandon's law office in downtown Burlington. Agent Walsh had invited me to observe the arrests as a courtesy to the primary victim, and seeing justice finally being served was more satisfying than I had ever imagined. "Units are in position at both locations," Agent Walsh said into her radio. "Execute arrests now." Through my binoculars, I watched as a team of 6 agents approached Cassandra's front door, just as she was loading suitcases into her BMW. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. They had caught her literally in the act of fleeing. "FBI, Cassandra Brooks, you're under arrest." Even from a distance, I could see Cassandra's face go white with shock. She had clearly believed she had more time before law enforcement would catch up with her scheme. The sight of federal agents at her door must have felt like a nightmare coming true. Brandon's arrest at his law office was equally dramatic. Agent Walsh received radio confirmation that he had been taken into custody while attempting to delete files from his computer system, destroying evidence that would only add additional charges to his already extensive list of federal crimes. "Mrs. Whitmore," Agent Walsh said as we watched the arrest teams load my daughter and son-in-law into separate FBI vehicles, "this is just the beginning. We've executed search warrants on their home, his office, their bank safety deposit boxes, and their storage units. Whatever evidence they thought they had hidden, we're going to find it today." The searches yielded results that exceeded even my expectations for the scope of their criminal enterprise. Within hours, Agent Walsh was calling me with updates that revealed just how thoroughly Cassandra and Brandon had documented their own crimes. "Mrs. Whitmore, your daughter kept detailed records of everything. We found spreadsheets tracking all the assets she stole from you, including projected sale values and liquidation timelines. She literally created a business plan for robbing you." "She documented her own crimes?" "Extensively. We also found communications between her and Brandon, discussing how to manipulate you, how to forge documents, and how to maintain the fiction that you were mentally incompetent. They even discussed strategies for keeping you committed to the psychiatric hospital indefinitely." But the most shocking discovery was a cache of documents proving that their crimes extended far beyond my case. "Mrs. Whitmore, we found evidence of 6 additional elderly victims. Not just the 3 we initially identified. This criminal enterprise has been operating for over 3 years, and the total amount stolen appears to exceed $2.3 million. The breadth of their crimes was staggering. Brandon had been systematically identifying elderly clients with substantial assets and few close family connections. He would then arrange for Cassandra to befriend these individuals, often posing as a concerned neighbor or volunteer from community organizations. "The pattern was always the same," Agent Walsh explained. "Cassandra would establish trust with the victims, then create some kind of crisis, a medical emergency, a family financial problem, or a home maintenance disaster that required immediate access to the victim's assets. How were they able to forge so many documents without getting caught?" Brandon had developed relationships with corrupt notaries and document preparers who would create fraudulent powers of attorney, medical evaluations, and legal documents for a fee. "We've arrested 3 additional co-conspirators today who were part of this document forgery network." The arrest of the co-conspirators led to even more devastating revelations. Dr. Richard Morrison, the psychiatrist who had created the fraudulent evaluation used to have me committed, was arrested at his home along with complete records of similar fake evaluations he had prepared for other victims. Mrs. Whitmore, Dr. Morrison has been creating false psychiatric evaluations for Brandon's scheme for over 2 years. We found at least 12 fabricated reports claiming that elderly victims were mentally incompetent, all used to justify financial exploitation by family members or supposed caregivers. The document forgery operation was equally extensive. A corrupt notary named Linda Vasquez had been arrested with records showing over 40 fraudulent power of attorney documents that she had notarized without ever meeting the supposed signers. This wasn't just theft, Mrs. Whitmore. This was a sophisticated criminal organization that specialized in elder abuse and identity theft on a massive scale. But perhaps the most satisfying development was the discovery of Cassandra and Brandon's personal communications, which revealed exactly what they really thought about me and their other victims. Agent Walsh showed me printed copies of text messages between Cassandra and Brandon that were both heartbreaking and infuriating. "Look at this exchange from 2 weeks after your stroke," Agent Walsh said, pointing to a series of messages. "Cassandra, Mom's definitely not going to recover enough to live independently. Perfect timing for the inheritance acceleration plan. Brandon, how much do you think we can liquidate before she gets suspicious? Cassandra, all of it. She's always been too trusting and naive. Besides, she'll probably die soon anyway, so we're just getting our inheritance early. Brandon, what if she recovers more than expected? Cassandra, then we'll handle it. Elderly stroke victims are easy to discredit. Who's going to believe a confused old woman over her loving daughter?" The casual cruelty of discussing my potential death as a business opportunity was stunning, but it was also legally devastating for their defense. "Mrs. Whitmore, these communications prove premeditated conspiracy and completely destroy any claim that they were acting in your best interests. This is evidence of cold-blooded financial predation." The federal prosecutor assigned to the case, Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Stevens, called me that afternoon with news about the charges being filed. "Mrs. Whitmore, based on the evidence seized today, we're filing charges of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, elder abuse, identity theft, racketeering, and document forgery. Given the amounts involved and the pattern of targeting vulnerable victims, we're seeking maximum sentences." What does that mean in practical terms? Your daughter is looking at 18 to 25 years in federal prison. Brandon could face even longer because of his leadership role in the conspiracy and his abuse of his position as an attorney. The co-conspirators will face substantial sentences as well. But Stevens had even better news about asset recovery. "Mrs. Whitmore, we've frozen approximately $890,000 in accounts containing proceeds from your stolen assets. We've also recovered the majority of your personal belongings that were sold through auction houses and estate sales." "What about my house?" "The sale has been permanently halted, and you'll be able to return home as soon as our forensic accounting is complete. We estimate you'll recover at least 85% of everything that was stolen from you." That evening, I received a call that provided perhaps the most meaningful closure of all. It was Jeremy, calling from the temporary foster home where he and Nathan were staying while the criminal cases proceeded. "Grandma Eleanor, I saw on the news that Mom and Dad were arrested. I'm really sorry this all happened." "Jeremy, none of this is your fault or Nathan's fault. You boys were victims of their manipulation just as much as I was." "Grandma, I need to tell you something. When the FBI agents interviewed us today, we told them the truth about everything. About Mom forcing us to sign those papers, about all the lies she told us, about your mental condition, about everything we saw and heard. That must have been very difficult for you." "It was, but Grandma, we wanted to make sure the truth came out. What they did to you was wrong, and we want to help make sure they can't hurt anyone else." "Jeremy, I'm very proud of both of you for having the courage to tell the truth." "Grandma, the social worker said we might be able to come live with you once everything gets sorted out. Would that be okay?" My heart soared at the possibility. Jeremy, nothing would make me happier than having you and Nathan live with me. We'll create a real family based on love and honesty. The next morning brought news of the final piece of the justice puzzle. Diana called to inform me that Cassandra and Brandon had both been denied bail due to flight risk and the seriousness of the charges. Eleanor, they'll remain in federal custody until trial. More importantly, their defense attorneys have already indicated that they want to discuss plea agreements. What kind of plea agreements? Given the overwhelming evidence against them, they're likely to plead guilty in exchange for slightly reduced sentences. But Eleanor, even with plea deals, they're looking at minimum sentences of 12 to 15 years in federal prison. That afternoon, I stood on the front porch of my Victorian home on Maple Grove Lane for the first time in over 4 months. The FBI had completed their evidence collection, and I was finally free to return to the house that Cassandra had tried to steal from me. The house was empty of furniture, but it was structurally sound and legally mine again. More importantly, it represented something that Cassandra had never understood. Home isn't about possessions or money. It's about the people who love and protect each other unconditionally. As I walked through the rooms where I had planned to spend my remaining years, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before my stroke: complete peace and security. The criminals who had tried to destroy my life were in federal custody, facing decades in prison. My assets were being recovered through legal processes. My grandsons would soon be living with me in a household based on truth and genuine care. But most importantly, I had learned that my own strength and intelligence were far greater than I had ever realized. Cassandra had thought my stroke made me vulnerable and helpless. Instead, it had revealed capabilities I never knew I possessed. She had tried to steal my life. Instead, she had given me the opportunity to prove that age, illness, and family betrayal could not break someone who refused to surrender to injustice. The investigation was complete, the arrests had been made, justice was being served comprehensively and without mercy. Now it was time to focus on healing and building the future that Cassandra had tried to destroy. 18 months after federal agents arrested my daughter and son-in-law, I stood in the kitchen of my fully restored Victorian home, preparing Sunday dinner for what had become our weekly family tradition. Jeremy, now 17 and preparing for college applications, was helping me arrange the dining room table, the same mahogany table that had belonged to my grandmother and that I had successfully recovered as evidence in the federal case. Nathan, at 15, was in the living room practicing violin, filling the house with music that would have been impossible during the months when Cassandra controlled my life and tried to silence everything that brought me joy. The boys had been living with me for over a year now, and the transformation in all of us had been remarkable. Grandma Eleanor, Jeremy said as he carefully positioned the antique silverware that had also been recovered from estate sales. Professor Martinez from the university called again about your lecture series. She really wants you to consider teaching that forensic accounting course for criminal justice students. The invitation to teach was one of many opportunities that had emerged from my experience. My case had become a landmark example of elder abuse prevention, and law enforcement agencies across the country had asked me to train investigators on recognizing and prosecuting financial exploitation crimes. I'm still thinking about it, Jeremy. It would be rewarding to help train the next generation of investigators, but I'm also enjoying having time to focus on family. You should do it, Nathan called from the living room between violin pieces. You're really good at explaining complicated things, and you could help a lot of people. The boys had been my greatest teachers in understanding what family really meant. Unlike their parents, who had seen relationships as transactional opportunities, Jeremy and Nathan approached love with the kind of uncomplicated generosity that I had always hoped to experience with my daughter. They had also been remarkably resilient in processing the trauma of learning that their parents were criminals. With the help of excellent counseling and the stability of a home where honesty was valued above convenience, both boys had thrived academically and emotionally. Grandma, Nathan said, setting down his violin and joining us in the dining room, when do we hear about Mom and Dad's final sentencing? The criminal cases had moved through the federal court system with the methodical precision that characterized successful prosecutions. Cassandra had eventually pleaded guilty to conspiracy, wire fraud, and elder abuse charges in exchange for a sentence of 16 years in federal prison. Brandon, whose leadership role in the criminal enterprise had made him eligible for enhanced penalties, had received 22 years. "The judge will announce the final restitution orders next week," I told Nathan. "But sweetheart, you know that what happens to your parents doesn't change anything about our life together, right?" "I know, Grandma. I just want to make sure all the other people they hurt get their money back, too." The boys' concern for the other victims had been one of the most touching aspects of their growth. Rather than focusing on their own loss and embarrassment, they had consistently expressed worry about the elderly people their parents had exploited. Their compassion had helped me understand that while Cassandra had failed as a mother, she had somehow raised sons with strong moral foundations. The doorbell rang, interrupting our dinner preparations, and I opened the door to find Emma Rodriguez standing on my porch with a covered dish and her characteristic warm smile. "Mrs. Eleanor, I brought my special tres leches cake for our dinner." Emma had become not just my housekeeper again, but one of my closest friends and a sort of honorary grandmother to Jeremy and Nathan. She had been deeply remorseful about her role in enabling Cassandra's deception, but I had helped her understand that she too had been a victim of manipulation. "Emma, you didn't need to bring anything, but that cake is going to make the boys very happy." "I also have news," Emma said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "My daughter Jessica got accepted to the nursing program at Burlington University. She wants to specialize in elder care because of everything that happened with you. She says she wants to help protect elderly people from what you went through." The ripple effects of my experience had touched many lives in positive ways. Jessica's decision to pursue elder care nursing was just one example of how my ordeal had inspired others to consider careers in protecting vulnerable populations. As we sat down to dinner, I looked around the table at the faces of the people who had become my chosen family. Emma, who had stood by me despite being intimidated and manipulated. Jeremy and Nathan, who had chosen truth over family loyalty when it mattered most. And absent friends who had supported me throughout my ordeal. Diana, who had fought tirelessly for justice. And Dr. Foster, who had recognized psychiatric fraud when she saw it. "Before we eat," I said, "I want to share some news with all of you." Jeremy and Nathan looked up expectantly while Emma paused in serving the cake. "I've decided to accept the teaching position at Burlington University. I'm going to develop a course called Financial Crimes Against the Elderly, Investigation and Prevention." "Grandma, that's amazing," Nathan exclaimed. "You're going to be Professor Eleanor. But more importantly," I continued, "I've also decided to establish a foundation using the restitution money I've recovered. The Eleanor Whitmore Foundation for Elder Abuse Prevention will provide free legal assistance to elderly people who suspect they're being financially exploited by family members." Emma clasped her hands together with delight. "Mrs. Eleanor, that's wonderful. You're going to help so many people." The foundation will also fund training for medical professionals to recognize signs of elder abuse, and it will support research into the psychological manipulation tactics that criminals use against vulnerable elderly people. Jeremy leaned forward with interest. "Can Nathan and I help with the foundation? Maybe we could do volunteer work or help with fundraising." "I was hoping you'd ask. I want you boys to be as involved as you'd like to be. This foundation represents our family's commitment to protecting people who can't protect themselves." As we enjoyed Emma's delicious cake, Nathan asked a question that had been weighing on my mind as well. "Grandma, do you think you'll ever forgive Mom and Dad for what they did?" I considered the question carefully before answering. Over the months since their arrests, I had spent considerable time in therapy working through my feelings about Cassandra's betrayal. The path to any kind of peace had been complicated and painful. "Nathan, I think forgiveness means different things in different situations. I've forgiven your parents in the sense that I'm not consumed with anger or hatred anymore. Their choices destroyed our relationship, but they didn't destroy my capacity for love and joy. But you don't want to see them or have them in your life anymore? No, sweetheart. What your parents did wasn't a mistake or a moment of poor judgment. It was a deliberate, systematic plan to steal everything I had worked for and to destroy my independence and dignity. People who would do that to someone they're supposed to love are not safe to have in your life, no matter what your biological relationship might be. Jeremy nodded thoughtfully. So forgiveness doesn't mean you have to let people hurt you again? Exactly. Real love means protecting yourself and the people you care about from individuals who have proven they're willing to cause harm. The most loving thing I can do for all of us is to make sure your parents never have the opportunity to manipulate or exploit anyone in our family again. And we're really a family now? Nathan asked, even though we're not technically related? Nathan, we are absolutely a family. Family isn't about DNA or legal documents. It's about people who choose to love, protect, and support each other consistently over time. That's exactly what we've built together. As the evening wound down and Emma prepared to leave, she pulled me aside for a private conversation. Mrs. Eleanor, I need to tell you something. Watching you fight back against what was done to you changed my whole understanding of what it means to be strong. I always thought strength meant accepting whatever happened to you and not making trouble. But you showed me that real strength sometimes means refusing to accept injustice, even when fighting back is difficult and scary. Emma, you were strong too. You testified truthfully even when it was uncomfortable, and you supported me when I needed allies most. I want to ask you something. Would you consider letting me help with your foundation? I know what it feels like to be intimidated and confused by people who seem more educated and powerful. Maybe I could help other families recognize manipulation when it's happening. Emma, I think that's a wonderful idea. Your perspective would be invaluable for helping families understand how these criminal schemes work. Later that evening, after Jeremy and Nathan had finished their homework and gone to bed, I sat in my study surrounded by the first edition mystery novels that had been successfully recovered from the auction house. The books were more than just valuable possessions. They represented the continuity of my intellectual life and the restoration of everything Cassandra had tried to steal from me. My stroke recovery was complete, but more importantly, my understanding of my own capabilities had expanded far beyond what I had ever imagined possible. At 70 years old, I had discovered that I was stronger, more resourceful, and more determined than I had ever known. The woman who had been abandoned by her daughter in a moment of medical vulnerability had transformed into someone who could build federal criminal cases, establish educational foundations, and create chosen families based on genuine love and mutual respect. Cassandra had intended to steal my life. Instead, she had given me the opportunity to create a better life than I had ever thought possible, one filled with purpose, authentic relationships, and the satisfaction of knowing that my experience would help protect other vulnerable people from similar exploitation. As I prepared for bed in the house that was truly mine again, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. The stroke that had initially seemed like the beginning of my decline had actually marked the beginning of the most meaningful and empowering period of my life. I had learned that family is something you choose and build, not something you're born into and obligated to accept. I had discovered that justice is possible when you refuse to be silenced by people who count on your shame and fear. And I had found that it's never too late to create a life filled with purpose, love, and the kind of security that comes from surrounding yourself with people who value truth above convenience. Tomorrow, I would begin preparing my curriculum for the university course that would train the next generation of investigators to recognize and combat elder abuse. Next month, the foundation would begin operations to provide free legal assistance to elderly victims of financial exploitation. And every day I would continue building a family with Jeremy and Nathan based on the principles of honesty, mutual respect, and genuine care. The note Cassandra had left about me not needing my things anymore had been wrong in every possible way. I needed every single thing I had recovered, not because of their monetary value, but because they represented a life well lived and a future filled with purpose. Most importantly, I had learned that the people who truly love you are the ones who see your strength when you feel weakest, who stand beside you when you're fighting for justice, and who help you build something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. That was a lesson worth far more than anything Cassandra had ever stolen from me. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.